221. Lake Fairy. How will you know if you don't try? Morgan Le Fay snapped, tapping her long-handled staff on the ground. A billow of poisonous green mist roared up, scorching sand and stone black where it passed. Invisible wings of wind condensed on Matthew's back. He scooped Ravenclaw into one arm, and the wings of wind lifted them away from the toxic fog. At the same time, Matthew lashed his staff behind him. A pillar of golden fire erupted beneath the white-haired witch's feet, towering up and swallowing her in flame. After releasing Fiendfire, Matthew didn't stop to watch the outcome. Carrying the unconscious Ravenclaw, he had no business getting tangled with Morgan Le Fay. His other companions were somewhere in Avalon, and he needed to find them first. He flew off. The pillar of fire exploded outward. When the smoke cleared, the white-haired witch stepped out unscathed. She was ringed by an invisible nullifying ward. Any fiend fire that touched it dissipated instantly. It was the same kind of counterspell she had used earlier to break Matthew's transfiguration. She glanced coldly in the direction Matthew had fled, but she did not pursue. Her strength was not what it had been. Banished from Avalon by the other ladies of the lake centuries ago, she had lost her immortality. Treasures and potions had kept her alive, but her body was rotten with age. Worse, she had recently split her soul to create a Horcrux, and now she was at her weakest. The brief clash with Matthew had made clear he was no trivial opponent. Instead of chasing him and risking further wear, she decided to go straight to the fairy spring. The spring could not make her young again, but it could return her to her original strength. Once restored, she could find a way to reclaim the missing shard of her soul. Her face darkened. From the pool at the center of the stream, a creature surfaced, a gaunt, red and black monster whose body was studded with bone spikes and countless eyes. The witch ground her teeth. "Herpo, how dare you show yourself before me?" The voice that answered sounded like a chorus echoing in a cavern. "I don't think you were telling me the truth either. King Arthur's burial place isn't in front of the largest oak, is it?" After Morgan Le Fay had found Matthew and the others by slipping into their dreams, she had hunted down a victim to satisfy the grisly requirement for splitting her soul. She had then hidden on the wooden boat. Herpo had latched to its hull and followed them into Avalon's territory. Once inside Avalon's wonderland, Herpo had attacked, overturning the boat to scatter them. His aim was simple: separate them and get the witch to the spring before she could regain power. He had learned of her weakness long ago and meant to settle the matter now. He almost regretted that Morgan Le Fay had not been destroyed in a mutual fight with the young man who had come from his era. If so, he could have taken care of both of them. "If you hadn't lied to me," the witch sneered, "I would have brought you to find Arthur's tomb after I finished changing my body." Herpo's conjecture was correct. She had been deceiving him. The method he taught could not seize another's body at all. The largest oak on Avalon, she knew, was precisely where Merlin had been sealed. She had not visited Avalon in centuries and could not be sure of his fate, but she did not believe Merlin would be so easily slain. Sending Herpo there had been a calculated misdirection. "Once I pry open your brain, I'll know where Arthur's tomb is." Herpo shrieked and lunged for her. Meanwhile, Matthew kept Ravenclaw close and flew low, skimming the treetops. Avalon was full of tricks. Flying too high would make them easy prey. After half an hour, he allowed himself a breath of relief. His ward sense detected no movement from Morgan Le Fay. Her robes appeared to be an alchemical creation that shielded her from his perception. The beach gave way to woodlands, almost entirely oak, though in the distance Matthew could just make out a cluster of buildings, something made by hands rather than nature. "Young wizard, come this way," a pleasant female voice spoke in his mind. Matthew startled. "Who are you?" he thought back. "I am Caroline of the Avalon Fairies," the voice replied. "I will guide you to the fairy spring. I have seen what happened to your companion. The soul attached to her can be removed by the spring." Matthew hesitated only a moment, then flew toward the voice with Ravenclaw. His own studies of souls were shallow. He could not extract a Horcrux without risking grievous harm to Ravenclaw. If the fairy spring could remove it, he had to try. A few minutes later, they arrived at a pool that covered several acres. Its marble rim gleamed. The water itself had a golden sheen. In the center of the pool lay a giantess, 100 meters long, the most striking sight. She was maddeningly beautiful, cream-skinned with hair like spilled ink, wearing only a diaphanous veil. She lay on her side as though asleep, but a massive wound ran several meters across her chest, and from it a steady stream of golden blood poured into the pool. So the spring's power came from this being. Matthew felt a chill. This pool is the fairy spring? The magic comes from her blood? Floating beside the spring was a blonde woman, veiled and modestly wrapped in white silk. 4 gauzy wing-like membranes drifted on her back, less bird's wings than an extension of her garment. Matthew spoke aloud. "Are you Excellency Caroline?" Caroline inclined her head slightly. "This is the fairy spring," she said. "You may place your companion in its waters to remove the extra soul." "Who is the giant?" Matthew asked. "She doesn't seem fully dead." He could feel the warding fluctuations around the giantess, powerful, alive. The rhythm was not that of a corpse, but of something that still breathed. 2 and 22, Fairy Spring. "I do not know her name either. I only know she is the Fairy Queen, the oldest of the fairies. They say she has been here since Avalon was born." The blonde fairy paused. Her consciousness faded long ago. Now only an empty shell remains. She had been a witch who later became a fairy and did not know the farthest reaches of history. The fairy folk did not keep records. If one stayed in the fairy spring long enough, one would grow those gauze-like wings, change into a member of the fairy race, and gain immortality. "Are you the only fairy left in Avalon?" Matthew asked. "In the Arthurian tales, there are 3 ladies of the lake." "There really were 3 in that age. The witch Morgan you fought was one of them," the blonde said. "But after she became a fairy, Vivian and I found her too corrupt and expelled her from Avalon. Not long after, Vivian came into conflict with Merlin. Vivian did manage to seal Merlin, but she paid with her life. Now I am the only fairy left in Avalon." Matthew nodded. He had heard something of Vivian's deeds. Legend called her Merlin's lover. He touched the spring water. It was warm, like blood in temperature, but without the metallic tang. Instead, it carried an indescribable fragrance. Finding no ill effects, he placed Ravenclaw into the pool and entered himself to bathe. "I have other companions," he asked. "They should have landed on Avalon, too. Can you see where they are and bring them here?" He wanted to gather his friends. Morgan and Herpo had also come ashore, and it was better to act together. The blonde shook her head. "I was able to speak with you because you were very close. My sight reaches a little farther than that, but I cannot see everything across the whole island." Matthew frowned. Whoever had come ashore with him was at some distance. That at least reduced the chance any of them would meet Morgan alone. A trace of surprise passed across the fairy's face. "You might not know yet," she said, "but after you left the beach, Morgan and that monster called Herpo fought. The outcome shocked me. Morgan actually lost. She's in worse shape than I thought. The body she left behind was hastily pieced together." She had been watching the shore the whole time. Matthew did not expect that result. Was Morgan killed by Herpo? The blonde shook her head. She seemed to have escaped, but only by abandoning her physical shell. Her expression went hard. "Herpo devoured the body Morgan left and has grown more powerful." "That direction. That's King Arthur's tomb," she blurted. "He wants to steal the 2 and the 18. A chill ran down Matthew's spine. His side hadn't regrouped yet, and the enemy was getting stronger. The blonde fairy took to the air, and her words echoed in his head. "I must go to stop him. Be careful of Morgan. It isn't hard for her to create another temporary shell. The body of the Fairy Queen is the best material for her to use for such shells. Do not let her near here." She left. Matthew hesitated a moment, then waved his Ta-24. Dozens of miniature Patronuses scattered in every direction. The fairy spring was vast. A single pair of eyes could not guard it all. He lifted Ravenclaw from the water and moved toward the spring's center to stay close to the Fairy Queen. As he drew near, the spring's effects intensified. At first, the water merely eased his fatigue, but now he felt the magic in his body waking. The pool grew deeper as he walked. What had been ankle-deep rose to his chest. He swam with Ravenclaw to beneath the Fairy Queen's wound and bathed directly in the freshly flowing golden water. Perhaps because it was fresher there, the effect was immediate. The dark aura around Ravenclaw's face faded rapidly. When a soul fragment becomes a Horcrux, it becomes part of the dark arts. The spring treated Ravenclaw's Horcrux as dark magic and stripped it away. A dark visage of black mist flew out from Ravenclaw's body. Its Horcrux had been torn free. Matthew extended his right hand. Semi-transparent tentacles sprang forth and shredded the dark face as it tried to flee. A scream rent the air, one's voice. Matthew's mental touch could not perform the delicate work of extracting a Horcrux, but it was very effective against such conspicuous things. After soaking a while, Matthew felt heat build within him. The magic inside him was wildly active, teetering on the edge of a magical outburst. Something held it back, however, preventing an explosion. Instead, the energy condensed into a highly concentrated, solid sphere in his abdomen. What was this? Matthew had never seen such a state and found no record of it. It wasn't his magic source. The magic source in a wizard is diffuse, not concentrated in one place, and spreads through the body. After becoming a formal wizard, the magic sources throughout the body connect with the 12 through the 0 of the pineal gland. Spirit, magic, and flesh becoming a trinity, forming a tight bond. An itch ran across his back. When he scratched, it felt as if something extra had grown there. Matthew's heart tightened. He remembered the fairy's gauze-like wings. Had he soaked too long and begun to transform into some kind of lake gentleman? Carefully feeling, he was relieved. Something had indeed grown on his back. To the touch, it felt like silk or gauze. He activated the invisible hand to lift himself up and flew to the fairy queen's shoulder. Once out of the spring, the itching faded. He hurriedly felt himself over. The wings were gone. The fairy queen's blood has a powerful assimilative effect, he thought. That lady of the lake left in such a hurry without warning me of the precautions. He breathed easier. He wasn't too worried about becoming a lake gentleman. It was more the thought that legends never mention lake gentlemen. Who knew if it might have turned him directly into a lady of the lake? The fairy queen must have been immensely powerful in life. Even now, centuries after her death, the blood flowing from her still possessed a strong infectious power. Perhaps in her lifetime, a few drops could transform another into the fairy race. 223. Morgan in a sorry state. Matthew examined his insides. The things that had grown on his back were gone, but the high concentration, solid T7 orb inside him remained. What exactly is this 7 orb? He wondered. He tried to channel into it and found it readily absorbed his energy, but nothing else happened. Then, using the meditation method, he watched the dense orb gradually disintegrate. My total tone has increased, he realized. Sensitive to even the smallest fluctuations, he felt the orb's 27 merge into his entire reservoir as it broke down. In the span of minutes, he gained more than he normally would from a month of meditation. A thought occurred to him. By leaving the spring before the change completed and repeating the process, he might be able to accelerate his gains. He tested it, bathing in the spring several times. He discovered the effect only occurred when bathing in water directly mingled with the golden blood still flowing from the fairy queen. Once the blood left her body, the power faded quickly, and the farther the water was from her, the weaker the effect. He filled one of his 1 containers with spring water while bathing. Even after the 27 boost faded, the water retained powerful healing, fatigue-relieving, and impurity-clearing properties for much longer, far better than his healing potions. The 27 in my body has reached the limit for a formal wizard, Matthew thought, feeling the fullness and stability of the energy within him. His 27 no longer rose. This trip to Avalon had saved him several years of cultivation. He was now only 1 step from breaking through to 2nd-level wizard, lacking only the cultivation of his 15. That made him think of the positive emotions gathered by the church. If he became a Dementor and absorbed those emotions, he might meet the conditions for breaking through directly. After the remaining inside him dissolved, he stopped bathing. The spring water was no longer useful for increasing his intensity. He stood on the fairy queen's shoulder and looked down at Ravenclaw in the pool. Light gauze wings had grown on her back, making her look as if wrapped in a cloak of translucent fabric. Matthew rubbed his cheek. If Ravenclaw disliked the change, she could always revert after leaving Avalon. From what he'd gathered, Fairy form depended on the fairy spring. If a fairy left Avalon and went long without bathing in the spring, she would revert to a witch's appearance and lose immortality. He had reasoned this when he remembered how Morgan had changed after leaving Avalon. His Patronus detected a faint movement. Matthew drew his 28 instinctively. There were no 27 fluctuations from his companions nearby. The only one who could be approaching was Morgan. She was a master of concealment. He hadn't located her yet. Summoning the oak trees on the bank, he raised them from the ground and transformed them into living guardians. "It's you again," a hoarse, ancient voice rasped from within the oaks. Morgan emerged, her skin looking like bark, an improvised body pieced together from oak material around her. Her previous flesh and blood body had been damaged, but still retained some of her strength. This new wooden form couldn't even muster a tenth of that power. After her earlier body had been swallowed by Herpo, she hadn't escaped so much as hidden. She had known the Lady of the Lake was in Avalon. In her weakened condition, meeting the lady would mean death. So, after abandoning that body, she had told Herpo the true location of King Arthur's tomb to draw off the lady's attention. Only after confirming that the Lady of the Lake had confronted Herpo did Morgan dare approach the fairy spring. Her goal here, as the lady had guessed, was to use the fairy queen's flesh and blood to construct a stronger body. But even then, she craved a living body, not one stitched together from 9. Matthew's summoned oaks dug up stones and flung them toward her. Morgan's dispelling, tricky and precise like a finite incantatum, could handle many magical assaults, so instead of attacking directly with 27, Matthew used a physical barrage. Morgan's face soured. She leapt onto a nearby trunk, but the living branches tangled and interfered. She managed to dispel them, but lacked time for a proper dodge and could only throw up a shield charm. Bang, bang, bang. Her shield took the stones, but it wasn't effortless. Before she could recover, another wave began. Matthew split the Oak Guardians into 2 groups and alternated their volleys, creating an unrelenting hail of boulders that left Morgan no chance to muster a full defense. "Young wizard, you must have heard my name. We can bargain," she panted. If this wore on, she would have to abandon the body and flee again, so she tried to parley. "I possess unique knowledge. Don't stop me, and I'll give you what you want." The old ones loved to tempt with knowledge. Matthew thought of Voldemort. He didn't pause. Since Morgan was already his enemy, he intended to end her while she was weakened. He raised his left hand, and several translucent tentacles of 27 lashed out toward her. Morgan's expression turned grim. She tried to dispel the tentacles, but found her dispelling had no effect. Her magic could not dispel a mentolith. The transparent tendrils sank into her, entwining part of her soul. With a bitter, cruel resolve, she tore away the portion of her spirit the tentacles had ensnared and chose to abandon her body. She spat out a mass of 12 black ants that, as they swarmed, vaguely formed a human face. Those black ants were her true 23. When she cultivated dark arts, she could fragment herself into countless tiny pieces. Each ant was a part of her essence. The face-shaped cluster scattered and fled into the distance. She did not dare linger. Matthew's power exceeded her expectations, and he even wielded 10, which greatly countered her abilities. Avada Kedavra! A green light streaked across the fairy spring and struck the black mist. The swarm of shards exploded, and Morgan's scream pierced the air. Large swaths of fragments fell from the sky, a few scattered in every direction. Matthew flicked his mental touch and caught some of them, but the rest were too spread out. Morgan slipped free. He frowned. Tenacious. A swarm creature that had survived this long had learned 1,000 ways to keep living. Apparition was impossible in Avalon. Matthew used his invisible hand to lift himself and fly to the shore. He glanced at the body Morgan had left behind. It had become an empty shell. There were no items on it. Whatever Morgan had been carrying had been swallowed by Herpo. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been reduced to such a pathetic, nearly powerless state. Matthew drew a knife and cut into the bark-like surface. Inside was a kind of elastic wood. It felt like a transfiguration trick. She'd used some technique that transformed materials but kept their original properties. With his knowledge of transfiguration, Matthew understood something immediately. He took the shards he'd caught. When he held them up, Blue light flashed across his eyes. He could see memory fragments inside each shard. Each one held only a piece. Together they formed the whole of Morgan's mind. No wonder she was desperate to become a living body. The shards enhanced her survivability, but they fragmented her soul. If a shard died, she lost part of herself. Matthew watched a few of the memories. Most concerned the dark arts. He didn't find the dispel magic he'd been hunting for, but he did find evidence of the transfiguration technique Morgan had used to assemble a body. It really was transfiguration, an approach that preserved the original material's properties even after transformation. His mind turned. Could he use this to make a new wand? He had many wands already, enough to use a different one every day for weeks, but none had been giving him much benefit lately. In the past, he hadn't had the right raw materials. Here, though, after bathing in the fairy spring, the transfigured material inside him would be highly compatible with the fairy queen. He couldn't make it too obvious. He certainly didn't want the Lady of the Lake to notice. The fairy queen was over 100 meters long. He only needed a tiny, inconspicuous piece. Hair for the core, a piece of bone for the shaft. He decided and moved. He'd planned to take a pinky bone fragment, but the queen's outer surface was too tough to cut. He had to enter through the wound over her heart. Inside, the ribs were already pried open. He could hear a long, slow heartbeat with wide intervals between beats. He gathered the scattered rib fragments and grabbed a single hair. For a giant that size, one strand was as thick as his finger. Matthew sat on the queen's shoulder, took a rib fragment, and transfigured it into black walnut. He modeled it on his own wand. The black walnut wrapped around the thinned, shortened golden hair. In moments, the bone fragment and hair became a 14.5-inch black walnut wand. Even though he transfigured the shaft into wood, it still carried the properties of the original materials. The wand felt like an extension of his arm, innately easy to use. "Fiendfire," he said, waving the wand. A golden fire crow burst into being. He tested the flame carefully and realized his fiendfire had changed. It was easier to control, significantly stronger, and no longer demanded the same flood of negative emotion. Other dark arts behaved the same. From now on, the dark arts would hold even less sway over him. Even ordinary spells were stronger than with his old wands. This was useful, very useful. The new wand looked identical to his previous one. No one would be able to tell. A startled cry came from the pool. "What happened to me?" Ravenclaw was awake. She found a light, gauze-like cloak growing out of her back, a wing that seemed to be part of her. Matthew floated down from the queen's shoulder. "You're awake." He explained quickly what had happened. Ravenclaw breathed a small sigh of relief. "Thank you, Matthew. You saved me again." She touched the soft fabric on her back. "Will this go away when I leave Avalon?" Matthew nodded. "That's my guess, but it's best to ask the Lady of the Lake." Ravenclaw concentrated. The gauze lifted, and with it she rose above the water. "I can fly," she said, surprised and delighted. Before they could say more, a voice entered their minds. "Did you bathe directly in the blood flowing from the fairy queen?" Matthew's brow twitched at the hint of surprise in the Lady of the Lake's voice. Before he could answer, she appeared, descending from the sky with Hufflepuff and Slytherin's nephew in tow. "I couldn't keep Herpo here," the Lady of the Lake said, "but I ran into some of your companions. I brought these two to the fairy spring to lift their curses. The others are still guarding King Arthur's tomb." She set the pair into the pool and warned them, "Don't go too close to the fairy queen." "Is the fairy queen's blood dangerous to bathe in directly?" Matthew asked. The Lady of the Lake's expression shifted. She looked almost distant, as if recalling something long forgotten. "No one has come to Avalon for hundreds of years," she said. "I forgot to tell you. Besides the effects you know, the fairy spring is the place where the fairy race conceives life." 225. Is Ravenclaw pregnant? "You mean bathing in the fairy queen's blood will turn someone into a Lady of the Lake?" Ravenclaw touched the soft veil floating behind her. "We already knew that. More than that." The Lady of the Lake shook her head gently. "Do you feel a sphere of highly concentrated twinning in your abdomen?" "I do." Ravenclaw rubbed her belly. "Isn't that what happens when you become a Lady of the Lake? This sphere of highly concentrated twin. We call it a magic seed." The Lady of the Lake looked at Ravenclaw and spoke slowly. If it is nourished with 21 over a long period, in time it will transform into a magic fetus. Ravenclaw froze. What? What? Once the magic fetus matures, the Lady of the Lake continued, a new life will be born from it. Matthew wiped his face awkwardly. He'd allowed Ravenclaw to bathe in the Fairy Queen's blood to help her recover quickly. He never expected this. Ravenclaw clasped her stomach, her face flushing scarlet. How could this be? If you do not wish to nurture a magic fetus, the Lady of the Lake comforted her. Simply do not feed the magic seed with 21. In a few years or a decade, the magic seed will dissipate on its own. Until then, it will not affect you. Ravenclaw breathed a sigh of relief and patted her chest. She wasn't ready to be a mother, not now. She hadn't decided whether she wanted a child like this, though the idea of giving birth to such an extraordinary child had its appeal. Hufflepuff pressed her ear to Ravenclaw's belly, curiosity written all over her face. Rowena, are you going to be a mother? Ravenclaw shoved her away. Stop it, I'm not ready. Matthew, Ravenclaw asked suddenly, are you pregnant too? If a male wizard bathes in the Fairy Queen's blood, will a magic seed condense in him as well? Matthew shook his head. Look, I don't even have wings yet. I only bathed for a very short time, so there were no changes. He was too embarrassed to explain that he had aborted a dozen times. Not really abortion. He'd simply been absorbing the magic seeds before they could develop into fetuses. Since none had matured, he couldn't be called pregnant. Ravenclaw looked a little wistful, but asked the Lady of the Lake, how long does this Lady of the Lake state last? You've guessed it isn't permanent? The Lady of the Lake said, nodding. Once you leave Avalon, you'll return to normal within a few weeks. If you choose to stay in Avalon, you can retain this state forever. Only those who gain the approval of all the Ladies of the Lake may remain in Avalon. Right now, she was the only Lady of the Lake left, so anyone she favored could stay. But Ravenclaw shook her head. I still have things to do. I can't stay here. Eternal life in Avalon was unacceptable to her. She was too curious about the world, with too many things left to do. The Lady of the Lake was not surprised and didn't press the issue. The lure of longevity differs with age. For a 17 of Ravenclaw's talents, 200 or 300 years would be likely. Longevity wasn't so tempting yet. Hufflepuff rubbed her hands. The nails on her fingers had vanished. Finally, the sacred nail curse is lifted. Not being able to use 21 felt terrible. Matthew produced 9 unconscious black ants. Lady Caroline, these belong to Witch Morgan. She was here recently. I drove her off. Morgan has been here? The Lady of the Lake took the black ants from him. It is indeed her aura. To think she's come to such a state. They are linked. A faint light rose from the Lady of the Lake's hand, scattering into dozens of points like fireflies. They darted into the depths of the oak forest. After a while, some of the lights returned, each encircling a black ant. With a wave of her hand, the Lady of the Lake crushed them. Soft, distant screams echoed as the points of light finished the deed. I have killed Morgan completely, she said. A voice sighed from within the oak forest. Are you dissatisfied that I let you kill Morgan? The Lady of the Lake raised an eyebrow. I recall you once were enemies too. The voice continued from the trees. I am merely sentimental. Another old companion of that era has fallen. Listening to the exchange, Matthew put the pieces together. An enemy from Morgan's time who could still be alive today. His mind went immediately to Merlin. Arthur's tomb has been opened, the voice added. The Lady of the Lake's expression darkened. Herpo has already opened the tomb? Did those 2 male wizards not stop him? He bypassed them. He didn't enter through the entrance, the oak forest replied. Once he devours Arthur's remains and takes the holy sword and the 5th Tang, his next target could be you, me, or even the Fairy Queen's body. The Lady of the Lake tensed and prepared to move. It may be too late to stop him now. Bring those young sevens to me. The holy sword's 5th chain lets its owner avoid magical damage. I will give them something to counter it. She had no means to deal directly with the holy sword's 5th Hang, so she would need Merlin's help. The Lady of the Lake led Matthew and the others to Avalon's heart, a colossal oak whose canopy spread like a living umbrella, its layered green leaves filtering sunlight into shifting, dappled patterns. Merlin had merged with this oak. As long as Avalon stood, the forest would not age or wither. In this way, Merlin had achieved a kind of immortality. One of the branches extended, holding a verdant gem. "This is the oak heart," the Lady of the Lake said, "a fruit formed by all the oaks of Avalon. It can help you shatter the 15, but there is only one chance." The emerald gem floated into Matthew's hand. He wondered why it had been given to him instead of to the Lady of the Lake. The moment he held it, Merlin's voice echoed in his mind. "I know you, 17, from the future." 226. How to get back in an instant. Matthew's consciousness found itself in a place of nothingness. It wasn't complete emptiness. Not far off stood an ordinary oak tree, and beneath it an old man with white hair sat on a stone. Matthew recognized the figure at once, the form Morgan had used to deceive them. The old man spoke kindly. "Do not worry. This is a dream. Even the Lady of the Lake, Caroline, cannot hear our conversation." Matthew felt a chill. Merlin had pulled him into a dream while he was still fully awake, far more powerful than Morgan's tricks. "Lord Merlin," he asked, "you know about my situation?" Leaning on his long-handled staff, 6, Merlin rose slowly. "Stories of me spread far in your future," he said. "In many of them, I am called a prophet. In truth, I do not see the future so much as look upon it. I know you because I saw you." Matthew's pupils narrowed. "Are you saying you can see the future?" Merlin nodded and drew a dim gem from his sleeve. "I have a gift for prophecy. With this gem, the 7, I have looked into the past and into distant futures." When Merlin produced the gem, something in Matthew's mind jolted. The mental core in his head, the 9, with its red and blue crystals, reacted. Matthew understood immediately. This gem was one of the components of that same device. Merlin smiled faintly. "In the past, I used this gem to peer through time and witness many possible futures. Once I saw the moment you picked up a disc at home, it flared with a dazzling light. I thought it might be connected to you. Now that you stand before me, I should entrust it to you." Merlin handed the gem to Matthew. The gem transformed into a stream of light and flowed into Matthew's mind. Merlin's eyes held confirmation. "As I thought, this gem is fated for you." The gem appeared on Matthew's mental core. Instantly, the device fed a flood of information into him. A realization hit. With this gem, he could traverse time. Its time power made temporal travel possible. By consuming that power, he could move to different points on the timeline. There was only one way to accumulate more time power: letting time pass. Matthew felt the crystal still held enough time power for him to return to his original timeline. Relief washed over him. For all the time he'd spent in the past, he'd had no clear way home. Now he finally had a plan. He didn't intend to leave immediately. The positive emotional energy generated by the church was an irresistible draw. He would wait until matters in Avalon were settled and see whether he could obtain that energy. Remembering something else, he asked, "Lord Merlin, the meditation method and runic magic were lost in later eras. Do you know why?" Merlin shook his head slowly. "That I do not know. The meditation method was widespread in my time. Then, starting on a certain day in the 6th century, it simply could not be recorded or described by any means. Even memories extracted by memory runes would be erased by some mysterious power. To this day, only I, who remained in Avalon, and the Lady of the Lake, Caroline, still practice the meditation method. The power that erased it transcends time. I used the gem to peer across ages and saw that this force affected every era, from the most ancient to the far future. You must understand there are countless timelines, each leading to different futures. That great power touched them all. The meditation method and runic magic were erased from every one. However, at some unknown point, that great power vanished. It disappeared from all timelines. Whether you travel to the past, remain here, or return to your future, you will find that power gone without a trace." As he spoke, a scroll materialized before Merlin. "You see, we can now speak freely of meditation and runic arts." Matthew felt a pang of disappointment. He had hoped returning to the past might reveal why the meditation method vanished overnight. Even Merlin could not explain. Matthew had a vague suspicion this might relate to the Wizard of Time, perhaps even to secrets around that wizard's fate. He took the scroll Merlin offered. It was a second-level runic spell called Vein of the Earth. The spell could draw magical power from deep underground and rapidly restore one's memory runes, valuable support magic. From his pocket, Matthew produced a second-level memory rune scroll, giant rock technique, to offer in exchange. They traded other spells as well. The most useful Matthew gained was the second-level Mind's Protection, which defended against mental attacks. His previous protection had been only first level, so this was an important upgrade. Merlin also possessed many basic meditation methods, but no high-level technique. After becoming bound to the oak, he had fashioned a unique meditation method suited to his new form. Matthew had no desire to cultivate it. The method required fusion with a plant to practice. Merlin confessed his realm was not high. Since becoming an oak, his practice enlarged his body and increased his magical power, but he could not break through to second-level wizard. In pure magical power, he far exceeded a second-level wizard, yet he could not ascend. It seemed the meditation method he devised was flawed. His tree body could not use human meditation methods, so he groped forward on his own. After they finished exchanging runes, Merlin offered one last warning. Be careful of Herpo. He has already obtained Excalibur and its 20 relic. Use Vein of the Earth to activate the Heart of the Oak, Merlin added. You will gain the power to shatter that 20. Merlin's voice faded. When Matthew came to himself, he was back in the real world. He slipped the emerald into his pocket, thanked Merlin, and set off for King Arthur's tomb. The fairy spring, the oak grove, and the tomb lay almost in a straight line, so they didn't have far to travel. Caroline, the Lady of the Lake, guided them to a magnificent marble mausoleum, the tomb of King Arthur. The palace was built of pure white marble, as pale as fresh snow, catching the sunlight in a soft, radiant glow. A grand portico marked the main entrance, its pairs of marble columns topped with capitals carved in intricate vines and flowers. Behind the portico stood massive golden gates, inlaid with gems and filigree of gold and silver, solemn and imposing. Gryffindor, Slytherin, and the two black siblings sat on the stone steps, apparently guarding the entrance, unaware that Herpo had already forced his way into the tomb from another side. Is the Holy Nail curse gone? Gryffindor asked as they approached. The spring water worked. It's gone. Hufflepuff rolled up her sleeve to show the missing Holy Nail. But didn't you notice? Herpo's already slipped into King Arthur's tomb. Gryffindor and Slytherin exchanged looks. We didn't see him. Merlin found him. The Oaks of Avalon are all Merlin's eyes, Caroline said with a sigh. I couldn't see as far as the tomb from the fairy spring, but I can see him now. He dug in from another direction. Arthur's tomb was reinforced with powerful conch sheath. I didn't expect anyone to break in the outer defenses like that. He already has the 22 and the 24. He'll be out any moment. Matthew summoned his Patronus and turned to the black siblings. Follow my Patronus. It will take you to Merlin. Things are about to get dangerous here. Herpo would be a difficult opponent. Matthew didn't want to be distracted by protecting others once the battle began. Irina and Kadir were sensible. Please be careful, teacher, and obeyed, leaving with the Patronus. Ravenclaw said calmly, We'll wait out here. I can set traps. As an alchemist, she preferred to meet enemies on prepared ground. No sooner had she spoken than a violent tremor shook the earth. With a tremendous crash, the marble roof of the mausoleum was ripped open. Rubble and dust filled the air, momentarily blinding everyone. Herpo's arrogant laughter rang out. Ha! You will all be my nourishment. Caroline's eyes flashed with indignation. In centuries, as the Lady of the Lake, she had never allowed anyone to run wild in Avalon. The last witch who tried, Morgan, had been dealt with by her personally. She raised her right hand and pushed outward. A gust swept away the dust. Dark clouds gathered overhead, crackling with lightning. When the dust cleared, Herpo floated in the air. He had fused himself to King Arthur's corpse. His head, like a sandworm's maw, was buried in the back of Arthur's skull. A slender, bony torso had merged into the king's cervical vertebrae. Grotesque ribs spread over Arthur's chest like a twisted breastplate. Herpo's limbs had become a skeletal armor enclosing Arthur's arms and legs. In his right hand, he held the two, its blade engraved with the name Excalibur, its hilt set with brilliant gems and carved with 29 runes. In his left hand, he gripped the 24, an artifact that provided powerful magical protection. He had not consumed Arthur completely. If he had, he could not have used the 2 and the 24. Those artifacts would only answer to King Arthur, so Herpo was using the dead king's body to wield them. Caroline pressed her hand down. Lightning poured from the clouds. Countless bolts smashed toward Herpo. "Futile struggle," Herpo cried, raising the 24. It flashed, and a pale gold shield bloomed around him. The lightning struck the shield and failed to leave so much as a ripple. Caroline's face darkened. He can actually use the 24. She had no knowledge of the artifact's origins. The 2 and 24 predated her stewardship of Avalon. When they had been recovered, it had been discovered that although Arthur was dead, the artifacts still recognized him as their master. No one else could use them. Only when a new king acknowledged by the 22 appeared would the artifacts change hands. Herpo swung the 2. The dark clouds were shredded by a wave of rune power, 29, and dispersed. "Help me stall him," Matthew said, drawing the emerald, preparing to cast the Vein of the Earth, 29 he had just learned. Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, and Hufflepuff attacked at once. Arcing flames, mist bombs of 616, fire serpents, and red beams of light streaked toward Herpo. The 20 shut them all down, however, neutralizing their spells. Herpo dove for the Lady of the Lake at terrible speed. He wanted her dealt with first. They had fought recently, and he had failed to defeat her. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Now, with the 2 and 24, no one could stop him. Caroline threw up a shield charm, but the 2's blade could cut anything. Herpo's swing tore through her spell like paper. The Lady of the Lake twisted, avoiding being bisected, but he was too quick. His blade severed her left arm and a gossamer wing. Pale gold blood welled from the wound. Her blood was not human red, but bore the same pale hue as the Fairy Queen's, though it did not share all of the Queen's properties. Herpo didn't relent. With the force of his follow-through, he drove the 2 into her abdomen. Caroline's right hand flared with intense light. A beam shot from her palm and struck Herpo's face, blasting him backward over a dozen meters. He responded by pounding the 4, and the beam sputtered out. When the light died, the face that had once been King Arthur's was unrecognizable. Clutching her wound, Caroline realized one crucial thing. He can't use the 2 and the 24 at the same time. 228. End. End. So what? Herpo sneered. My methods of attack aren't limited to just using the 6. Dense rows of eyes sprouted from the 16 on his body. Dozens of blackish-red beams shot out from them, sweeping toward the group. Matthew did not interrupt his casting. He continued to prepare his 31. It was extremely difficult to drive the 7 using the Vein of the Earth 31. The So-7 was a formation born of every oak tree in Avalon fused together. Matthew had to link to every oak in Avalon through the Vein of the Earth to power it. Ravenclaw and the others stepped between Matthew, who was still preparing his and the incoming beams, and together they cast a nested shield charm to blunt the assault. On the other side, the Lady of the Lake blocked the blackish-red rays on her own. These wards were not like the 6, which cut through everything. The beams were fully stopped. Herpo cast a cold look toward Matthew as he felt the magical aura from that direction intensify. Even he felt a prickle of dread, and he decided he must deal with the wizard who had come back with him. Herpo surged forward, but his feet were suddenly clamped by pincers. A scorpion puppet Ravenclaw had planted in advance. It crawled out of the soil and stabbed its tail needle toward Herpo's face. At the same moment, Gryffindor flickered behind him, raising his longsword and slashing at Herpo's neck. Herpo swung the 6 and snapped Gryffindor's blade. Without losing momentum, he followed through, slashing at Gryffindor's face. The eyes on his chest fired blackish-red beams and shattered the scorpion puppet's tail needle. Gryffindor flickered again, teleporting back to Matthew's side and narrowly avoiding Herpo's strike. Herpo's eyelid twitched with a bad premonition. He turned and saw the scorpion puppet suddenly explode. Having just used the 6, it was too late for him to activate the 28. Boom! The blast even carried to Irina and Kadir, who had left the area a while ago. The scorpion puppet had been a distraction. Its true payload was the high-concentration 4-4. Ravenclaw had hidden inside. Herpo staggered out of the smoke and flames. The explosion had blown away much of his 16, and both feet of King Arthur's 24 had been shattered. He sprouted new bones to replace his original legs. The light veil on the Lady of the Lake's back transformed into 10, coiling and binding Herpo's hands and waist. Once secured, he could no longer swing the 6. The eyes on his body fired blackish-red beams again, trying to pierce the 10, but the ribbons were extraordinarily tough. The beams only gnawed at them slowly. Finally, Matthew linked to every oak in Avalon, and the 7 in his hand shifted into an oak longbow. In the forest, every tree swayed though there was no wind, their rustling braided together at a single frequency that sounded like children singing a nursery rhyme. Countless waves of emerald light gathered toward the oak longbow like a rising tide and condensed into a single. No one arched the bow by hand, but the string drew taut on its own. As the string thrummed, the 0 leapt into being directly in front of Herpo. He tried to activate the 28 in panic, but the 0 pierced his pale gold shield in an instant, then dissipated in the air. The 28 in Herpo's grasp was suddenly covered by a web of tiny oak branches, wrapped so tightly that it no longer answered him. He tore at the branches, and with a small amount of force, the 28 itself splintered into several pieces. Fear finally crept into Herpo's face. Even a divine artifact like the 28, said to block all 31 in the world, had been shattered. He had no idea whether Matthew could summon such an attack again. With his hands and waist still bound by the unbroken 10, his situation was dire. He resolved to retreat. If he could take the 6 with him, the raid would at least be a partial success. Outside Avalon, there were still many wizards. With the 6 in his hands, there would be few who could stop him. He could devour his way to greater power. No need to throw his life away here. Huge 25 sprouted from Herpo's back as he tried to flee, but the oak trees themselves seemed to come alive. Countless branches lashed out and coiled around him, binding him tight. Matthew realized with a chill that Merlin could command all the oaks. Avada Kedavra, Matthew shouted, waving his third. Green light poured onto Herpo. The others joined in, and several spells slammed into him. Herpo's body swelled grotesquely. He roared, "Let's all die together!" Then, bang! Herpo detonated into a bloody mist. "Careful, don't inhale this mist," someone warned. Matthew immediately swept his 32 and turned the surrounding soil into a metal sphere that trapped most of the bloody fog. Golden flames ignited inside the sphere. Herpo's miserable screams echoed, then faltered. The fiend fire burned the mist until there was nothing left. When Matthew opened the sphere, only the burning fiend fire remained. With a tap of his 32, the flames dispersed, leaving only a handful of ashes. A red glow, visible only to Matthew, issued from those ashes and was absorbed by the 15 in his mind. Relief washed over him. Void power was always emitted after an enemy's death. Herpo was truly dead this time. "It's over," Matthew said, then looked toward the one person here who was injured. "Lady Caroline, are you all right?" The Lady of the Lake was badly hurt. Herpo had concentrated his assault on her, striking her twice with the 26 and leaving her grievously wounded. "Don't worry," she said, forcing a reassuring tone as she used a healing 31 to staunch the worst of the damage, then picked up her severed limb. "These injuries can be restored at the fairy spring." The fairy spring's restorative power was immense, enough to reattach a limb and make it whole again. The Lady of the Lake then picked up the 6 and the shattered remains of the 28, planning to see if Merlin could repair what was left. The group stood in a silence that was half relief and half sorrow. Herpo had blown King Arthur's remains apart. King Arthur's tomb would now be no more than a cenotaph. A famed ruler of a generation could not even rest in peace. 229. An unbreakable vow. They all stood once more before the massive oak. When Matthew appeared unharmed, the tension in Arena and Kadir eased at last. The oak's branches swayed though there was no wind, and several fruits, glowing with an emerald radiance, drifted toward the group. Merlin's voice echoed in their minds. "Accept these fruits. They will grant you the ability to communicate with nature." After everyone took a fruit, Matthew's consciousness slipped back into the dreamscape. The oak behind Merlin was far less lush than before. Its leaves had withered. Using the heart of the oak had clearly taken a heavy toll. Merlin shook his sleeve and produced a black ant from within. Matthew's heart lurched. Is this Morgan? Isn't she dead? Merlin gave a small smile. She is dead in the physical world. Years ago, before we became enemies, she learned from me the art of hiding one's consciousness within dreams. I see. Matthew understood. Morgan had tried to escape death by retreating into the dreamscape, and Merlin had extinguished that last refuge. Merlin continued, I examined her consciousness and extracted the memories you need. With them, you'll be able to return to your original timeline. Matthew's curiosity spiked. Morgan's memories could actually help him get back to his own time. Merlin crushed the black ant. A wisp of blue smoke drifted toward Matthew. A moment later, Matthew murmured, Transfiguration clone? From the memories Morgan had left, it was clear she had attempted a transfiguration to produce a clone. Yes, Merlin said. You must use it carefully. That transfiguration is difficult. Morgan tried and failed. She split herself into a swarm of black ants and could not return to her original form. Merlin pressed a finger to his temple and drew a strand of silver light from his mind. There are also fragments I glimpsed through that gem. You'll understand when you see them. Matthew received 3 memory fragments. One showed Irina learning the Transfiguration clone. Another showed Irina becoming the Lady of the Lake. The final fragment showed Irina using a clone to pose as Merlin's portrait at Hogwarts. So the one who sent me back to this era was actually the future Irina. Matthew scratched his face. The loop was closing in his mind. When the time came, he would have to leave something for Irina. Merlin smiled. Farewell, wizard from the future. I have not seen the distant future, but I have a feeling you will play a vital role there, perhaps like Arthur. Merlin's voice faded, and Matthew returned to reality. Time in the dreamscape had felt stretched, but in the real world, they had only just received the oak fruits. The fruits did not need to be swallowed. On contact, they dissolved into streams of light and flowed into their bodies. The world seemed to sharpen. If he listened carefully, Matthew could hear whispers, the voices of the oakwood. The ability to speak with nature was said to be an exclusive gift of the Druids. The Lady of the Lake, Caroline, turned to Irina. Are you willing to stay in Avalon? Caroline felt their forces in Avalon were thin, with only her and Merlin left. If trouble struck again, they would have difficulty handling it. Irina was young and talented, exactly the sort of person Avalon needed. Irina looked to Matthew. She would follow her teacher. Matthew said, Irina still needs experience. The Lady of the Lake nodded. You may choose to remain in Avalon until you are 20. Caroline believed that staying too long in the mortal world could sully one's heart, as had happened with Morgan, who became an enemy of Avalon. She would not repeat that mistake. Hufflepuff, a few years older than Ravenclaw, was already over 20. Otherwise, with her talent, Caroline would have asked her to stay as well. Slytherin's nephew remained by the fairy spring. After Slytherin fetched him, Merlin gave him an oak fruit. Uncle Salazar, I think I can speak Parseltongue, the boy said, surprised, as the oak fruit activated a bloodline talent within him. Sss. Very good. Slytherin's eyes showed a flash of relief. Neither his brother nor his child had inherited the family's Parseltongue, and he had not expected it to awaken in Avalon. Caroline watched them leave. They departed in a wooden boat and reached safely the same lake where they had first arrived. What are your plans? Slytherin asked. With the holy nail curse lifted from his nephew, and Hufflepuff, 24, would no longer be able to track them by the curse, so they had escaped 24's pursuit. I'm going to the Goblin Kingdom to retrieve my sword, Gryffindor said. Slytherin curled his lip. I'm sure you'll stir trouble there. A friend lives nearby. Once I've settled my nephew, I'll go with you. I can come along, Ravenclaw said. My town was destroyed. I have nowhere to go for now. Hufflepuff hadn't decided and planned to tag along. Matthew cleared his throat. I have something to say. The 7 looked at him. After a pause, Matthew spoke calmly. I am actually A26, who accidentally came to this era from the future, and so is Herpo. In the future, he is my enemy. During our fight, we were caught in a strange magical explosion. That explosion sent Herpo and me back to this era by abnormal 30. In Avalon, Lord Merlin detected the residual abnormal 30 on me. He can help me return to my original timeline. I need you to keep this secret. Whether I can get back depends on it. The seven were skeptical, but Matthew's expression was earnest, and they believed he was not joking. Time was an enormous mystery to 26. Research into temporal 30 was shallow in any age. Even if someone in the future had invented the three, no one truly understood the principles of time. Irina's eyes brimmed with tears. "Teacher, are you leaving?" Matthew patted her head. "Don't worry, I'll teach you to be a proper 26 before I go. Besides, we'll have a chance to meet again." Gryffindor scratched his face and reached out his hand. "Matthew, wherever you come from, you're our friend." "I'm willing to keep your secret," Ravenclaw said, placing her hand over his. "Me too," Hufflepuff added, thankful for Matthew's role in saving her. Slytherin did not speak but also laid his hand down. Though not close to Matthew, he still wished to help. The other three followed suit. When Matthew placed his right hand on top, a thin golden thread sprang to life and bound their hands together, an unbreakable vow. When the thread vanished, the vow was sealed. The unbreakable vow is a magical binding used to lock an oath between 26s. If anyone breaks it, the breaker will die. Matthew breathed a quiet sigh of relief. Luckily, Gryffindor had suggested the vow first. Had Matthew raised it himself, it might have seemed coercive and strained their friendship. Half a month later, the group arrived at the Goblin Kingdom. Gryffindor had come to collect the sword he had commissioned from the Goblin King, Ragnuk. Goblins in this era were far stronger than those of later generations. Among the magical creature clans, the Goblin Kingdom was regarded as top-tier power. Gryffindor was excited as they entered the castle, counting the final payment over and over. His personal longsword had failed him at critical moments, broken or dulled against powerful foes, and he was eager for a reliable weapon. He trusted the 20's craftsmanship, and King Ragnuk had a reputation as the finest silversmith of the day. Ragnuk received them in a throne chamber built in the style both humans and 20s favored in that age. He was middle-aged and wore a small, impeccably tailored version of a human formal suit. He looked more like a sharp-eyed businessman than a smith. On the long table before him lay a rubied sword. Gryffindor bowed. "Your Majesty Ragnuk, I'm here to collect my sword." "Gryffindor, my friend," Ragnuk said with a smile. "The sword is finished," but he let the pause hang. "The quality of this blade exceeded even my expectations. It wouldn't be fair to sell it at the price we agreed." Gryffindor's face darkened. "We agreed on a price beforehand. How can you raise it after the work is done?" Ragnuk's eyes flickered. "If you insist on the original price, I can forge another, but it will take time. If you reforged it, it would delay me," Gryffindor said. "I came to collect it at the agreed time. You should compensate me for my losses." Ragnuk picked the sword up, drew it halfway from its 18, and let it catch the light. "This blade is extraordinarily keen. It can absorb substances to strengthen itself. Bathe it in dragon blood, and it will toughen and sharpen. Coat it in venom, and its strikes will carry poison." Gryffindor hesitated. If Ragnuk spoke the truth, the sword was far better than he'd hoped. "How much more do you want for it?" Ragnuk answered plainly. "Twice the price." "Twice?" Gryffindor's eyes widened. "I can't afford that." "Then take another sword," Ragnuk offered again. Gryffindor had seen this blade. He would not accept an inferior substitute. He shook his head and after a moment said, "I'll borrow the rest from my companions." He borrowed the sum from Slytherin. He didn't ask Matthew Black, who was leaving soon, and whom Gryffindor feared he could not repay in time. Gryffindor paid Ragnuk, took the sword, and the group left the Goblin Kingdom. Watching them go, Ragnuk felt a pang of regret. It was the best sword he had ever made. That night he could not sleep and rose to forge another blade, but nothing flowed right. Several blanks were ruined. In the cold light of dawn, he realized the first sword had been a fluke. He would never recreate it. Full of rue, he summoned his subjects. "Gryffindor has stolen my sword. Bring it back." Even as they left the kingdom, there were signs the goblins' anger might come to pass. Matthew Black, sitting beside the campfire, found he hadn't seen any 20s pursue them yet. He chatted with the four companions while, a short distance away, a transfiguration clone of Matthew taught Irina and Kadir. Matthew had learned the transfiguration clone during this time and concluded it was not as dangerous as Merlin had claimed. Morgan's transfiguration foundation was simply too weak. Her use of a clone had gone wrong because it wasn't a perfect execution. It appeared the Transfiguration clone the others had seen was not Morgan's original 25 after all. Matthew had experimented with the clone and learned its limits. The clone's maximum 25 capacity was only the amount consumed when it was formed, and it needed 25 to maintain itself. The clone could draw 25 from the vein of the earth, but the reserve dissipated quickly. Relying on the vein alone was not enough. Only in Avalon, where the vein of the earth was exceptionally strong in the oak forest, could a clone be sustained more stably. Matthew planned to leave behind a Transfiguration clone to continue teaching Irina and Kadir as he moved on from the era. Suddenly, Matthew's senses pricked. Something approached. "A group of 20s is hiding in the woods," he whispered. "You were right. That Goblin King is stingy," Gryffindor crowed, flexing his wrists. "I'll use them to test my sword." He strode to the camp's edge and called, "Come out, I found you." A group of 20s stepped forward. "Thief, return His Majesty's sword at once." "I paid for it," Gryffindor replied, amused. "You untrustworthy lot." The 20s fell silent and raised their 26. A barrage of 25 shot toward Gryffindor. He drew his new blade and moved like lightning, the sword flashing as it severed their 26. Several 20s had hands sliced off. Panic broke their ranks, and they fled. "Go back and tell your king," Gryffindor called after them, grinning. "If he does this again, I'll use this sword to cut him and all his subjects down." He hadn't even needed to channel any 7 to slice through their armor. The blade's edge was that fine. A few months later, Matthew decided it was time to leave this era. He had tried to extract the positive emotions he needed from the Worcester Town Church, but the church's defenses were too tight. He planned instead to jump to a moment when those defenses would be lighter, when 17 changed popes, and the powerful 21s would be concentrated at the diocese holding the inauguration. Matthew activated the 10 in his mind. The 8 around him flared into a dazzling light. Chapter 231, River of Time. This time, Matthew actively traveled through time and space and witnessed a different sight. He arrived in a peculiar realm where countless rays of light converged, forming an orange river of light. Time itself was invisible. What he saw was only a projection shaped by his perception. As he watched those rays, fragments flashed through his mind in an instant. These rays of light were all different timelines. One of the timelines before him stood out, his own. Matthew reached out, grabbed it, and was instantly drawn into it. An inexplicable intuition had told him to do so. In the blink of an eye, the orange river of light vanished, and Matthew found himself suddenly standing in a river that came up to his waist. The surface broke into 1,000 ever-shifting reflections. In those reflections, he saw many scenes. Meeting the black siblings for the first time, the carriage being stopped by Gryffindor, the chance encounter with Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff on the stake, Slytherin blending into Worcester Town, and moments of them traveling together to Avalon and the Goblin Kingdom. He walked on and saw them establishing Hogwarts. At this point, Gryffindor had become famous as the strongest dueling master in Europe, and Ravenclaw had given birth to a baby girl. Irina returned to Avalon, while Kadir settled in a wizarding hamlet, married, and had children. The images were fragmented and incoherent. Matthew reconstructed them from what he already knew. He walked farther and came across a scene that looked like an inauguration ceremony. He bent his body and dove into the river. Instantly, he felt himself falling at infinite speed. All sensations were stripped away. Then, after a moment, cold air touched his face. His eyes saw woods, birds sang again in his ears, the scent of earth filled his nose, and his body came back into the world. He was on the outskirts of Worcester Town. His figure blurred for an instant, and he transformed into a pigeon, flying high. As expected, they've all gone to attend the High Priest's inauguration. There are far fewer priests in Worcester Town, Matthew thought, observing from the air as he headed straight for the church. To his knowledge, the Holy Pool of Worcester Town was inside that most prominent hall-style building. He landed on an outdoor sculpture among other pigeons and waited, blending in. Seeing no dangerous magical beings, he flew into the hall. Inside the building, there was a sculpted fountain. Positive emotional energy gathered in its pool. 2 white-robed priests noticed him, but before they could react, their hands and feet were bound by their own robes, transfigured into iron chains. Matthew cast 2 quick spells and sent them into a deep sleep. So hungry, he transformed into his Dementor form. A terrible hunger and thirst slammed into him, slowing his thoughts as if his mind were clogged. He rarely used this form because it clouded his thinking, but the scent of positive emotion from the pool was irresistible. He plunged in and began to feed. With one deep inhale, the positive feelings were drawn from the spring water. The ravenous hunger in his mind receded, and his mental energy surged. After he had absorbed all the positive emotions stored in the pool, Matthew resumed human form. He felt his mana had expanded more than threefold. This trip had saved him years, even over a decade, of cultivation. Next, he only needed to consolidate the expanded mana and integrate his consciousness into his magical core to attempt a breakthrough to second-level wizard. He had also bathed in the fairy spring in Avalon, which had cleansed the impurities from his magic. His chances of success were now extremely high. Having taken what he needed, Matthew left the scene, found a lake, and returned to Avalon. There, he immediately re-established contact with the Transfiguration clone he had left behind. Over a decade of memories unfolded in his mind. He could have rejected those memories, but his mental strength was now sufficient that they no longer affected him. The Transfiguration clone lacked an independent personality. It acted under Matthew's will. Watching the clone's memories was like seeing a first-person movie. It didn't intrude on his own perception. He met with Irina in Avalon. She had grown a great deal. No longer childish, she had become a graceful, elegant lady of the lake. Under the guidance of Matthew's Transfiguration clone, Irina had become a magical practitioner capable of standing on her own. She had already reached strength comparable to a young Gryffindor. From the orange crystal, Matthew took a portion of time power and gave it to her so she could send him back to ancient times in the future. After saying goodbye to Irina, Matthew entered the River of Time again. This crossing would take him a vast distance to return to his own era. The longer he stayed in the River of Time, the greater the resistance and the more time power he consumed. After this trip, the time power stored in the orange crystal would not be enough for decades-long time travel again. He would have to wait for it to slowly accumulate more time power. Perceived time in the River of Time meant nothing. After an unknown interval, Matthew finally arrived in his own era. He bent his legs and sank into the river, falling at infinite speed once more until sensations were stripped away. Then, after a moment, his body sensed the world again. "My God! Where did you come from? Who are you?" someone shouted. Matthew opened his eyes to find himself in a Muggle burger joint. The shop was small and not crowded, only 2 servers and 1 customer, and all of them stared at his sudden appearance in shock. "Ladies, please forget what just happened," he said with a slight smile. He took out his wand and cast a memory-erasing charm, wiping their recollection of him. His figure twisted and vanished from the spot. The next moment, Matthew appeared in Hogsmeade Village. Crossing the River of Time carried risk. The longer the jump, the greater the error. Matthew had no exact idea where or when he had landed. After arriving in Hogsmeade, he put on a disguise and bought a stack of newspapers. He needed to know the situation first. Before he left, things at Hogwarts had been precarious. The Goblin army was poised to storm the castle. He didn't know whether Dumbledore had returned in time. The date on the paper read September 1st, 1993. Matthew frowned. He had arrived at the very start of the school term. He had left in spring. He had missed an entire summer. My summer vacation, gone just like that, he thought, with an unexpected twinge of regret. Student summers were short. He had few left. The past week's papers were dominated by 2 stories. The headline that day announced that Dumbledore had resigned as Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. During the Goblin Rebellion, Dumbledore had left the International Conference Hall. The goblins stationed at the entrance detonated a toxin. Most of the representatives inside the meeting had died from the poison. Ministries and factions across the wizarding world were furious. They declared that Dumbledore, as Supreme Mugwump, had been derelict in his duty and should no longer hold the post. Dumbledore had conceded and stepped down. His failure to save the delegates had earned him the resentment of many. Under pressure, the Board of Governors demanded a new head for Hogwarts, and it seemed likely Dumbledore might lose that position as well. Cornelius Fudge had been suspended, implicated in the incident, and the ministry was awash in complaints. Amid the chaos, the papers filled pages on Rufus Scrimgeour, head of the Auror office. With the Auror department expanded, Scrimgeour was the most influential figure in the ministry, and many now considered him the most likely candidate for the next Minister for Magic. Matthew read it all with a growing frown. The goblins had clearly engineered the catastrophe, yet politicians had managed to pin the blame on Dumbledore. It was obvious too many people had been waiting for an opening to swarm him and tear him down. Reassured that Dumbledore had returned in time, after Matthew had sent Fawkes the Phoenix to find him, Dumbledore had chosen the students over the delegates and prevented the goblin assault. Matthew checked the hour. The students should still be on the Hogwarts Express. He pulled out the 17 he used to contact Sirius and wrote, "I'm back." The device answered almost immediately. "Is that you, Matthew? If it is, come here quickly. Dumbledore is dying." Matthew's heart lurched. How could Dumbledore be near death after only a few months? He wrote, "It's Matthew. Where are you?" An address appeared on the paper, the Gaunt Shack. Is it related to Lord Voldemort? Matthew thought. He had sent Sirius undercover at Voldemort's side and had scouted this location in case he needed to reach it fast. He vanished from Hogsmeade and arrived at the Gaunt Shack in an instant. Sirius and Dumbledore's 28 signatures were both present. Sirius's aura was steady, but Dumbledore's fluctuated wildly, sometimes violent, sometimes feeble. Sirius flinched when he saw Matthew. "You're all right," he breathed, choked with relief. He had been preparing to attend Matthew's funeral. The sight of him alive was overwhelming. After Matthew had disappeared months ago, vanishing alongside Herpo, who had turned into a monster, Luna, Jerry, Geralt, and the others had all witnessed the scene. Dumbledore had examined the traces and concluded they had been teleported away. For months, hope had lingered, but when no word came, everyone had assumed Matthew dead. "Let's not talk about that now," Matthew said, turning to Dumbledore. Dumbledore lay propped up against the shack's rotting wall. His right hand and the entire forearm looked as if they had been burned to charcoal. A black mist curled from the wounds and crept across his skin. Matthew checked quickly for a curse. "Is this a curse?" he asked. Dumbledore forced his eyes open. "Matthew, I'm glad. You're here." His voice was thin. "I couldn't resist the temptation, and I walked into Voldemort's trap." Sirius's face crumpled. "It was my undercover identity that was discovered," he said. "I didn't even realize it until—" He swallowed hard. "Before you disappeared, I followed the Death Eaters to the Ministry to rescue prisoners. After we were done, before I left, I told an Auror where I thought their temporary base was." Matthew looked from Sirius to Dumbledore. Sirius continued, voice shaking with guilt. "Later, an Auror led a team to strike that base. They were useless, only caught a few Death Eaters. At first, I feared everyone would think I leaked the location. Then months passed with no fallout, and I thought it was over. One day," Sirius went on, "I overheard Voldemort talking with Bellatrix. He gave her something, an object, and told her to hide it well. I followed her and saw her hide it in this shack." Dumbledore tightened his hand on his cloak, but his breath came fast. "A few days ago, Voldemort emerged from his embryonic state," Sirius said. "I've seen him now. He looks like a hideous infant. Bellatrix brought him away from here. I thought, after that, I told Dumbledore everything. Looking back, Voldemort already knew I was his mole. He set a trap." Dumbledore's eyes met Matthew's. The light in them was dimming. He began to speak slowly, each word an effort. "Matthew, I am dying," he coughed, and the black mist shivered. "If it is possible, I hope, you can utterly defeat Lord Voldemort. Do not let his plan succeed." 233. It's not that easy to die. Matthew understood then how cunning Lord Voldemort had been. After discovering that the Peter impersonated by Sirius was a traitor, Voldemort had played his part without revealing anything. He had laid a meticulous trap for Dumbledore, one that came in the form of the 40 and had cursed him. Matthew tried to use the invisible hand to pull the 40 from Dumbledore's finger, but it seemed fused to his flesh and would not come off. Dumbledore groaned. I tried. It's no use. This was a trap, prepared for me by Lord Voldemort. Matthew took a vial of golden liquid from his pocket, water from the fairy spring, an elixir that could purge curses. When he poured it onto the 40, it hissed like oil on hot coals, and a black smoke drifted up. After a moment, the strange object cracked into pieces and fell from Dumbledore's hand. Matthew poured more of the spring water over the burned skin. The charred marks faded quickly. The curse had spread too far for a single vial to dispel, so he used several before the last of the corruption was driven out. Matthew, I thought I wouldn't last much longer. Dumbledore's expression softened. Seeing Matthew reach for another vial, he added, That potion must be precious. The curse is gone. Don't waste it. Dumbledore knew this was no ordinary hex, but a carefully designed snare by Voldemort. He had believed his life was at an end. Matthew felt no real regret about using the fairy spring water. He had a supply, and it would have been wasted if left unused. Besides, he could always go back to Avalon. His disciple Irina was the Lady of the Lake, and Avalon was now accessible to him. It will help you recover faster, Matthew said with a small smile. Compared to your health, these potions are nothing. Thank you, Matthew. Dumbledore accepted the gratitude with a relieved smile. He could stand now, though Matthew could feel the curse had damaged his vitality. That loss would not heal quickly. Professor Dumbledore, how did Voldemort trick you into putting on this 40? Matthew asked. With your wisdom, you wouldn't have been careless. It was my weakness, Dumbledore admitted with a sigh. The 40 was disguised so cleverly that I thought it was the 23, one of the Deathly Hallows. The 23, Sirius blurted, startled. He had never understood why Dumbledore had worn that object before. Now he did. Few could resist the lure of the Hallows. Dumbledore, unwilling to revisit a past he preferred not to speak of, let the subject drop and instead asked, Matthew, where have you been all this time? And Lanik, the goblin who turned into that creature, does he still live? Matthew told them the story he had prepared. It was Professor Merlin who sent us back 1,000 years. Sirius stared. What? You went back 1,000 years? Lanik became like that because Herpo had possessed him, Matthew said. Herpo was drawing power from the 14. Merlin judged that if Herpo continued to feed on it, no one could stop him, so Merlin channeled the energy of the 14 and sent Herpo and me back 1,000 years. In that age, I met Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin. We traveled together, searching for traces of Herpo. In the end, with the 4 deans united, we defeated him and prevented a catastrophe. Matthew did not try to hide his time in the past. Traveling with the 4 founders was an achievement worth mentioning. He omitted Avalon. Immortality and the place itself were too dangerous to broadcast. Both Sirius and Dumbledore were stunned. Neither had expected Matthew to have had such an extraordinary experience, much less to have worked alongside the 4 founders. Even Dumbledore felt a twinge of envy. The idea of traveling with Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin and fighting together for a common goal was intoxicating. How did you get back? Dumbledore asked more calmly. Merlin gave me the chance to return, and the 4 deans helped, Matthew answered. He shifted credit to Merlin. After all, Dumbledore could not reach Merlin even if he wanted to. It's good that you're back. Dumbledore nodded. He could tell Matthew didn't want to go into details and did not press. Let's get back to school. Term starts today, and everyone thinks you aren't returning. Matthew remembered Sirius's earlier remark and found it a little amusing. I might have to attend my own 35. According to what I've been told, your 35 is tonight, right after the 10, Dumbledore said with a smile. Matthew turned to Sirius. You can't return to Voldemort's side now. Peter Pettigrew must be brought to justice, and then you will finally be cleared. Peter Pettigrew was being held at Snape's place, with Snape keeping an eye on him. The polyjuice potion Sirius had used while undercover had been provided by Snape. Because Sirius had needed to assume Peter's identity to infiltrate Voldemort's camp, Peter's capture had been kept under wraps. That secrecy meant there had been no hard evidence to exonerate Sirius before. The case had been dismissed by Fudge as mere rumor, but Rufus Scrimgeour, who was now running for Minister for Magic, would surely be eager to reopen it. The Auror office exposing the minister's failures would be a story that served Scrimgeour well and would restore Sirius's reputation. Sirius's face hardened. He had waited for this chance a long time. After this, lock Peter up in Azkaban and let him feel what I've felt for 11 years. Azkaban had been reclaimed by the Ministry, and those 6 were imprisoned once more. Dumbledore summoned Fawkes. The Phoenix lifted them and carried the 3 of them toward the headmaster's office. Dumbledore checked the clock on the wall. The sorting ceremony should be starting soon. I must be in the Great Hall. Matthew, are you coming with me? As headmaster, he had to be present for the sorting. Matthew rubbed his chin. Attending one's own funeral while still alive would be a novel experience, he said. Dumbledore chuckled softly. That does sound intriguing. I might try it myself. He waved his hand. The papers on his desk vanished and were replaced by a pot of tea and some pastries. You two can catch up here in my office. I'll go to the hall first, he said, and left. Matthew pulled out a chair, took a pastry, and sighed. So, what are your plans now? I haven't decided. If I'd been free sooner, I would have applied for the Defense Against the Dark Arts post under my real name, Sirius said, scratching his face. But Dumbledore has already brought in Remus. He'll make a fine professor. Sirius bit into a pastry and immediately frowned. It was far too sweet. Matthew felt the same. The headmaster's snacks were cloying, so he sipped his tea to cut the sugar. Then come help me. I want to start a company. Sirius leaned forward. Besides strength and reputation, capital mattered, often the difference between influence and impotence. What kind of company? There's a lot I want to do. Have you spent much time in the Muggle world? Matthew asked. A lot of wizarding customs are outdated. Communication still depends on owls. Only a handful can use Patronuses for messages. And the way we travel long distances, the Flu network and portkeys, is ancient. Muggles are already going to space. Wizards should have satellites and space stations too. Sirius blinked. I don't follow all of that, but do you have a way to make it happen? Matthew shook his head. Not yet, but it's the right direction. Also, I know 2 classmates skilled in alchemy. At first, we can pick simpler projects to raise funds and build a customer base. He produced the roll of a communication scroll he'd used to contact Sirius. I want to start a media company. The alchemical process behind this scroll could be used to make newspapers. Newspapers? Sirius frowned. Wouldn't that be expensive? Newspapers need replacing daily. Nobody would pay for something fancy. Matthew smiled. Our newspaper won't need replacing every day. It will be a window whose content updates daily. Magic made moving images possible. If the animation ran long enough, it would merge the functions of print and television. Add the ability for readers to write comments and articles, and it becomes like the Muggles' internet. Sirius considered that. Sounds brilliant, but the important thing is content. You'd need reporters and editors. That costs a lot. Matthew patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry, I have savings. The House of Black had left substantial wealth, enough for an initial investment. Money in a vault wasn't capital. Once it moved, it became one. Since you've thought it through, I'm in, Sirius said, rubbing his stomach. But first, let's find something decent to eat. These pastries are lethal. Matthew agreed. They weren't allowed to have the house elves bring up food to the headmaster's office, so they went to the kitchens themselves. The sorting was underway, and the corridors were mostly empty. In the hallway, Matthew's expression shifted. He sensed a familiar ripple of magic. Matthew? Luna's ethereal voice called. Sirius shrugged at Matthew, and with a conspiratorial mouthing, signaled, You handle this. I'm out. Luna approached as if nothing surprised her, and without ceremony, laid her face against Matthew's chest. He held her gently. I'm back, he murmured. I know, Luna whispered. Preserved Egg told me on the train. As Matthew's familiar, Preserved Egg could sense him. Where is he? He's off finding his new friend, Luna said. New friend? Crookshanks, Hermione's cat, Luna said, then added, I didn't have any new friends, so I came to find you. Matthew felt the damp warmth against his chest. This time was an accident. I won't disappear like that again. They hadn't been apart like this before. Promise? Luna asked. I promise. Her emotions steadied, and she asked, Where did you go? 1,000 years back. Matthew took several small things from his pocket. I met Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin. He put a bracelet of twigs and tiny flowers on Luna's wrist. Ravenclaw wove this for you. The flowers were grown by Hufflepuff. I think those flowers are extinct now. He handed her a crude stone lion. Gryffindor made this. Finally, he produced a snake-shaped amulet. This is from Slytherin. Luna blinked, delighted. Then your journey must have been wonderful. Matthew smiled and began to recount his encounters with the founders. This year's opening turned out to be one of the most unusual in memory. After the sorting, instead of beginning their meals, the students gathered by the Black Lake, at the place they had agreed to hold Matthew's funeral. A casket stood by the water. Through its glass lid there was no body, only clothing. Lee Jordan, who knew how to work a crowd, acted as master of ceremonies. He held a script and spoke with gravitas. Today we gather, he's to mourn a dear friend, Matthew Black. In this painful hour, our hearts are shrouded in sorrow. We have lost an exceptionally precious person, selfless, noble. He went on, listing deeds and virtues. He was more than a friend. He was a hero who saved Hogwarts. He sacrificed himself for our future. The light of his life shines in our hearts. He was an outstanding Quidditch player. His loss is felt across the sport. Through his actions, he gave us the true meaning of courage and sacrifice. His deeds will forever illuminate our memories. Though he has left us, his spirit and his love remain. Let us observe a moment of silence to commemorate this heroic soul and pray for his repose. Grief pressed on everyone. Jerry and Geralt looked devastated. Harry clenched his fists, unable to accept that the tall, protective figure he had admired was gone. Hermione sobbed against Ron's shoulder. Neville wept loudly. Even the usually smiling Weasley twins were silent. Snape stood distant and unreadable. Flitwick sighed, small and mournful. McGonagall and Sprout dabbed their eyes with handkerchiefs. Dumbledore's eyes were moist. Then someone snorted a laugh. The sound cut through the sorrow and riled the crowd. Dumbledore, sensing mischief, turned toward the right. Everyone followed his gaze. Between McGonagall and the new Professor Lupin stood a man many found unfamiliar. McGonagall's expression hardened. "Sirius," she scolded, "this is Matthew's funeral. There's a time and a place for joking." Sirius only shrugged and pointed to the far right. "Why don't you all look over there?" Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville were standing at the edge of the crowd. Neville, who for a moment hadn't noticed anything new, turned and his face went white. "Senior Matthew," he whispered. "Hello, Neville. Long time no see," Matthew said, smiling and patting his shoulder. Neville stammered, "How can I be touched by a ghost? Am I dead too?" There were many ghosts in Hogwarts, but except for the peculiar Peeves, most had no physical substance. Hermione, seeing Luna beside Matthew, understood before anyone else and cried out, "Senior Matthew is back!" The funeral was cut short. Everyone returned to the Great Hall and clustered around Matthew. Students and professors alike listened as he recounted his adventures, some true, some tall tales. The conversation drifted into lighter territory. "Does Gryffindor really have a head of red hair like a lion?" someone asked. "He didn't when I met him. He had short hair," Matthew replied. "Is Ravenclaw beautiful?" "Beautiful. What about Hufflepuff?" "Also beautiful." "Is Slytherin like a snake or a monkey?" "He was very handsome when he was young. Later, I don't know." By the time Matthew's voice went hoarse, Dumbledore mounted the dais and tried to call for attention. No one listened. At last he drew his wand and sent a burst of fireworks into the air above the hall. "Silence. I have an announcement." When quiet fell, Dumbledore said calmly, "As you can see, Matthew Black has returned. Even so, he remains the hero who defended Hogwarts. He prevented a terrible disaster from becoming worse. Therefore, 300 points to Slytherin." He paused, then continued, "In addition, I will be awarding the special award for services to the school. Matthew Black's name will be permanently placed in the trophy room." Thunderous applause filled the hall. Even the new students clapped with vigor. When the applause faded, Dumbledore's smile grew sharper. "One more thing, an announcement concerning the fifth-year students." Jerry, sitting near Matthew, suddenly clutched his hair and muttered, "It's over." "What's wrong?" Matthew asked. Dumbledore's expression could have been carved from mischief. "Since the fifth-year students did not sit last term's finals, starting next week, there will be makeup exams for everyone." Wails rose at once. Jerry's face drained of color. "I knew it," he groaned. "I just knew it." Gerald let out a long sigh. At the end of last term, the Weasley twins started a movement. Everyone in our year boycotted the finals to keep Matthew Black's record at the top. The professors didn't act then because the outcry was loud and many joined. I can't believe we're starting an exam week at the start of the new term. Matthew's eye twitched as he watched the scramble for blame and the attempts to dodge responsibility. The Weasley twins, who had been listening to his tales, were suddenly bereft. "No!" Fred wailed, covering his face. "Matthew, I thought you'd be in heaven watching over your good brothers." Matthew curled a lip. "I can't go to heaven," he said flatly. "I'm here." 235, writer and journalist, 2-in-1. Azkaban was cold and damp. The air reeked of rot and despair. After the rebellion, goblins outnumbered humans among the prisoners. Every goblin who had taken part sat behind iron bars here. In one cell on the right, a wizard lay flat on the floor, limbs splayed like a starfish. Frost crept along the walls and the bars, and the temperature dropped sharply. He shivered and crawled into a corner, curling inward. He knew the Dementors would be patrolling. He tried to keep as far from the door as possible, forcing himself to dredge up his worst memories to make them think he was already empty inside. "Professor Lockhart?" The gentle, oddly familiar voice made him freeze. Lockhart looked up, disbelief flitting across his face. "Matthew!" He crawled toward the visitor and seized his leg. "Matthew, even Azkaban couldn't hold you. I knew it. You were destined to be a great wizard. Just like Dumbledore. No, better than Dumbledore." Lockhart's flattery became nearly reverent as he dropped to his knees. There had been no real enmity between them. Lockhart could not imagine Matthew coming without cause. Kneeling, he said in an abject tone, "Do you have any instructions for me then?" After the Ministry retook Azkaban, Lockhart had been imprisoned too. He had not killed anyone, so his sentence was only 10 years, but Azkaban was not an ordinary jail. Dementors were everywhere. Anyone without an iron will would go insane long before a decade passed. Matthew's face was mild. "Professor Lockhart, I admire your talent." "You mean your books?" Lockhart stammered. "I've read them all," Matthew said. "In my opinion, they're the best biographical works in the wizarding world." Leave aside the facts. Lockhart was undeniably the most famous living storyteller. "So you want me to write biographies about you?" Lockhart understood immediately. Matthew wanted to build fame through memoirs and biographies. Matthew nodded and opened his right hand, releasing a tiny gleaming Patronus. "If you're willing, it will protect you from the Dementors for those 10 years. Matthew had no intention of releasing him, but he could offer certain benefits to anyone who worked for him. Lockhart's eyes shone. "I'll do it. Of course I'll do it." Matthew produced a roll of 28 and a quill. "Write your drafts on this 28. I'll be able to receive the manuscript." The Weasley twins had recently upgraded this 28. It was different from the one Matthew used to correspond with Sirius. This model was aimed at writers, editors, and journalists. Text didn't vanish immediately, but was recorded. Once Lockhart finished, Matthew would receive the complete manuscript. He told Lockhart stories about himself and about the 4 founders of Hogwarts and asked him to write them into a biography. Lockhart's hands rubbed together in glee. "Traveling to the past with the founders of Hogwarts?" he said. "Splendid. We could split it into volumes. I've already thought of titles for the first 4. Wandering with Gryffindor, Vacationing with Ravenclaw, Saving Hufflepuff, and Walking with Slytherin." Isolated in Azkaban, he had no idea that Matthew's name had been plastered across the wizarding press all month. Matthew smiled and handed him a newspaper. "You should see this for reference." The paper was a Weasley twins product, the first from Matthew's fledgling media company, the Wizarding newspaper, still in beta. Its contents were dynamic. For the test run, it compiled existing reports about Matthew. As intended, it could host contradictory pieces. Lockhart's fingers trembled over a headline, "Black's Lies." Source, The Daily Prophet, Rita Skeeter. The article systematically debunked the very stories Matthew had just told Lockhart, depicting him as a despicable liar. Lower on the page was another piece, Hero Black. Source, The Quibbler, Xenophilius Lovegood, about Matthew stopping the Goblin Elder Lannick's scheme, traveling through time, and standing against Herpo with the founders of Hogwarts. "Those are the stories you told me?" Lockhart asked, bewildered. He had assumed Matthew was fabricating tales. Matthew smiled. They really happened. I want more people to know. I need you to write them down. Lockhart stared, speechless. Matthew continued, because of your reputation, the author column will use a pen name. That name will never be publicly revealed. Broken and desperate, Lockhart did not ask for more. I will write them as well as I can, he promised. After he left Lockhart, Matthew paid a visit to another person. Rita Skeeter lived in a solitary house on a hill in the suburbs. Lately, the Daily Prophet reporter had printed many unpleasant things about him. Matthew intended to have a little talk. He slipped into a sparrow and perched on an open window. From his magical perception, the house seemed empty. Rita was not home. He waited. After a long while, he heard a faint buzzing and watched a small beetle fly toward the window. The beetle hesitated when it noticed the sparrow, then turned and flew to the front door. Is that? Matthew blinked. The beetle shifted into a woman with garish glasses. Rita Skeeter, an animagus. He flew in after her. Rita pulled keys from a crocodile skin handbag and pushed the door open, irritation on her face. The bird at the window had interrupted her. But her mind was full of what she had just overheard, and she hurried to her study. This was her secret. Illegal animagus transformation into an unremarkable beetle let her eavesdrop on important people, and with the aid of a Sleven, she could turn a few minutes listening into a 2,000 or 3,000 word draft. She had barely finished scrawling when a soft voice sounded beside her. Fudge had a falling out with his secret lover? Tsk, tsk. Rita's face went white. She had not heard anyone enter. The chair toppled as she scrambled to her feet. When she looked up, she saw Matthew and shrieked, "Matthew Black!" She had been writing damning pieces about him all week. If he'd slipped into her house unnoticed, it could only be trouble. Matthew said casually, "Miss Skeeter, your ability to collect information is impressive. I didn't even know Fudge had a secret lover." Rita stood with one hand behind her back, poised. "What do you want? I'm a fully grown witch. Don't be irrational. Leave now, and I'll pretend this never happened." There was a glint in her eye. She planned to go to the Auror office the second he left and have him arrested. That would make headlines. Hero Black, exposed as a prowler. She reached for a device, a 42, and began to activate it, intending to record his actions as evidence. Matthew waved a hand, and the 42 she was casting wavered under a force she could not control. Her face drained of color as the device cracked under that simple gesture. She had been preparing to use a 5 to record him, but Matthew had neutralized it before she finished. He said softly, "Miss Skeeter, I only want a proper conversation. Don't do anything unnecessary. It could put you in danger." Cold sweat broke out on her face. She had always assumed Matthew Black was a Dumbledore protege, a young star whose feats were exaggerated. Matthew regarded her with an expression of bemused apology. "Perhaps because of my age, you feel we aren't equals in conversation." "That's my oversight," Rita said. "I should show you some," she swallowed, "strength." At his words, the room around her seemed to melt. The roof sagged like wax. The whole little hill was dissolving. Ah! Rita clutched her hair and screamed as the world around her ran like water. Matthew controlled it precisely. It flowed over her like a basinful of water and then drained into the ground. Within moments, the house and the hill had become a level patch of earth. Matthew smiled. "Miss Skeeter, do you think we are equals now?" Rita collapsed and gasped. Of course we are." He had performed silent, wandless transfiguration on a scale she had never seen. Even with a 43, she had never witnessed someone erase a small hill so easily. It would ordinarily require several experienced wizards working together. She reached for a final refuge. Dumbledore. If Dumbledore intervened, he would stop Matthew. Saying his name steadied her. Matthew's mouth twitched. "Thinking of Dumbledore at a moment like this? I recall you wrote The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore." Rita's eyes widened. "You're reading my thoughts." Matthew laughed softly. "Your mind is an open window. I merely glanced in as I passed." She bowed her head, too frightened to meet him. "I won't tell anyone. I won't cross you again. I don't feel your sincerity." Matthew took a 43 from his pocket and set it on the ground. Rita scrambled backward, babbling, "Calm down. You're young. Don't do anything illegal." He didn't stop. He laid down another 43. Then another. Dozens of different 43 spread across the flattened earth. These were artifacts he had seized or bought over the years. "You should hear my story," he said quietly, picking up the one Rita had dropped. "Mahogany, 24, a curious combination. Perhaps one day I'll confiscate a 43 like that from a dark wizard." He attributed all those items to seizures from church wizards 1,000 years ago, washing his hands of the implication of violence or theft. Seeing the hundreds of 43s, Rita swallowed hard. The realization hit her. Matthew Black was not Dumbledore. He was not constrained by the same moral or legal strictures. He obeyed law and ethics because he chose to, not because he could be bound by them. Rita fell to her knees, hands on the dirt, voice shaking. "Lord Matthew, I admit my wrongs. I shouldn't have slandered you. I'll make amends, anything you ask." Matthew's tone was gentle. "Miss Skeeter, I do admire your talent." 236. Magic News in History of Magic. Professor Binns's voice had a soporific effect. Ron would normally take the opportunity to catch up on sleep. Binns's lectures were practically made for napping. But in this particular class, Ron didn't slump over his desk. Instead, he had a newspaper spread across his lap, his left hand occasionally sliding across it. It was the Wizarding newspaper, a product of the Magical Age publishing house. For the price of a single paper, you could access far more content than a traditional paper offered. Best of all, the Wizarding newspaper had a dedicated reading column. Ron's favorite was Wandering with Gryffindor. It told the tale of Matthew Black traveling back 1,000 years to Rome and adventuring with Godric Gryffindor. The serialized account was far more vivid on the page than when Matthew himself had told the story, and once Ron started reading, he couldn't put it down. "Arthur, what are you looking at?" Professor Binns's voice drifted across the classroom. As always, he'd called the wrong name. Startled, Ron tried to stuff the paper into his robes, but Binns was already floating by and had seen the paper. In a panic, Ron's eyes flicked to the open textbook on his desk, and he seized on an excuse. "Professor Binns, I'm looking something up. See, this is a description of an ancient wizarding market. I find it fascinating. Muggle vendors and wizarding vendors selling things in the same market." Binns leaned in, peered at the passage Ron indicated, and then, as often happened, drifted off into a reverie. After a long pause, he murmured, If it was a village where wizards and muggles lived together, such situations did indeed occur." A pleased smile crossed his face. "Arthur, there aren't many children who love history of magic as much as you do anymore." 1 point to Ravenclaw. Ron's eye twitched. "Professor Binns, I'm Ron Weasley, a Gryffindor student." "Then 1 point to Gryffindor as well," Binns said, floating away with his hands clasped behind his back. Ron let out a quiet breath of relief. Thankfully, the professor didn't know how to turn the page on the magical paper. Had he looked further, he would have discovered Ron's true distraction. The paper was touch-operated. With a slide of the finger, you could turn pages and open up new content. Ron slid through the reading column until the serial abruptly ended and a single line replaced the text. "The trial for Wandering with Gryffindor has ended. To continue reading, please subscribe to Wandering with Gryffindor." "Subscribe?" Ron blinked. He checked the price, 1 silver sickle for the rest of the installment. That sounded like a bargain. Physical books were expensive. A printed storybook might cost over 10 sickles. If he could finish Wandering with Gryffindor on this paper, he'd save a lot. Subscription required, sending the fee to Magical Age Publishing House via School Owl, so Ron would have to wait until after class to borrow one. He tapped Add to Bookshelf in the corner to mark the series, then slid from corner to corner to exit back to the reading column's homepage. There were many other works available, familiar titles and famous authors. The Tales of Beetle the Bard, Terrifying Animals of the Deep, Basic Charms for Hyperactive and Irritable Animals, Dragon Species of Great Britain and Ireland, Conjure Up a Feast, Broomstick Care Manual, Monsters and Their Habitats, and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Ron noticed several books by the magizoologist Newt Scamander. He'd always been a little interested in magical creatures, so he clicked on Monsters and Their Habitats and started reading. That evening, in a relatively out-of-the-way part of Diagon Alley, 5 adjacent shops had been renovated and merged into a single storefront with a brass sign above the door, Magical Age Publishing House. It was already 10 o'clock, but the shop was still brightly lit. In the office, Sirius Black was swamped. Envelopes piled into a small mountain on his desk, all subscription letters from readers. The response had been far better than he had expected, and because the company was understaffed, he'd been left to handle it himself. "Can't you lend a hand?" Sirius said, glancing over at Matthew, who was lounged at the tea table, calmly sipping. Matthew smiled. "I'm not idle. We just split the work. I was the one who contacted most of the authors who joined." Sirius snorted. "If I hadn't been locked up 11 years, I'd have known some talented people too." "There are a lot of subscribers for the Daily Profit column. How did you get them on board?" Sirius asked. "When I went to their offices earlier, I couldn't even see the editor-in-chief's face," Matthew said with a small grin. "Miss Rita Skeeter helped a bit." Sirius's eyes widened. "She'd been attacking you in the Daily Prophet a while back, calling you a fraud. Now she's praising you? Is that a bribe?" Matthew spread his hands. "Perhaps she discovered my virtues. In any case, we cleared up our misunderstanding." It had been an effective conversation. Rita Skeeter had published a glowing piece overnight, even dredging up Matthew's Quidditch trophies from his Hogwarts days. Through her influence, Matthew had managed to get the Daily Prophet to join the Wizarding newspaper's news column. "Sirius, I've been thinking," Matthew continued. "We should move production out of this shop. Let this be the editorial and business office. Your office can stay here, of course, but the factory needs its own space." Currently, the magical paper production happened here. With sales increasing, they needed more wizarding craftsmen to make the devices, and the cramped shop couldn't hold more people. Shops in Diagon Alley were expensive. Opening a factory here wouldn't make sense. Matthew had already registered the relevant patents. Nobody could copy their newspaper exactly, but others could use the same magical principles to make things like enchanted books or enchanted tables through other methods. He needed to expand fast, capture the market, and cultivate user habits. He couldn't let the physical paper be the barrier. He would rely on content fees to make up for losses on the paper itself. "So where should we move?" "Hogsmeade?" Sirius asked. Matthew shook his head. "We'll need something bigger. Better to establish a new industrial park." "Industrial park?" Sirius had never heard the term. "I'll take you to a Muggle factory district so you can see what I mean." Matthew thought it important to give Sirius a little grounding in the Muggle world. The two apparated to a London industrial district, a complex of factory clusters, some with upstream and downstream relationships. Products fresh off one line moved to the next for processing. Disguised with a disillusionment charm, they walked through the park. Even at night, many factories were still running, workers in 3 shifts, keeping machines humming around the clock. "I feel Muggles manufacture things even faster than wizards," Sirius said, throat tight. He hadn't paid much attention to the Muggle world. He'd gone straight into the war after Hogwarts and then spent 11 years in Azkaban. This was his first time seeing a Muggle factory in operation, and the speed astounded him. They were passing through a food factory, and Sirius, counting the output, realized how much the assembly line produced in minutes, more than an entire day's work for an adult wizard doing similar manual tasks. Matthew sighed. The wizarding world is still largely in a handicraft stage. Most production is small scale, individuals or small workshops, so efficiency is low. Meanwhile, the Muggle world uses mechanized production, electricity and fuel drive machines, expanding scale and raising efficiency. Sirius murmured, "The wizarding world has a lot of room for improvement." "That's what we're going to do," Matthew said. "The wizarding world is too conservative. It needs a push." The next day, Matthew went to see his uncle-in-law, Paul Huck. He needed land. "You want to buy land to open a factory?" Huck sounded surprised. Matthew hadn't even finished his education yet and was already planning a business. Was the wizarding world so competitive? Matthew handed Huck a copy of the Wizarding newspaper. "I'm opening an enchanted manufacturing factory. The employees will be wizards, and the products are for the wizarding world." Huck flipped through the pages under Matthew's guidance. "This paper is clever, like a newspaper crossed with the internet," he said. He looked thoughtful. The internet already existed among Muggles, though the wizarding use of similar ideas was still primitive. Huck, a cabinet minister, recognized a business opportunity but couldn't pursue it himself. The thought only flickered through his mind. There's an abandoned industrial area in the Derwent Valley owned by the Arkwright Society. They planned to make it a tourist site, but because it used to be a textile factory, the land's contaminated with dyes and chemicals. They gave up and are looking for a suitable buyer. Can wizards handle pollution? Huck asked. Matthew nodded. Pollution isn't a problem. Wizards are good at dealing with these things. That's worth a look, Huck said, and he made a call. He had his assistant handle the inquiry, and then added, Could I observe how you handle the pollution? Huck had an agenda. There were plenty of old industrial sites like that one. If pollution could be solved, those lands could be reused, and Huck's department would benefit from the funding and the political capital. Matthew agreed. He handed the newspaper to his uncle, seeing Huck's curiosity grow. More than 2 months later, Matthew had completed the paperwork and acquired the land. Under Huck's influence and assistance, he had cleared up pollution problems on several old industrial plots, returning the land to use. As a result, he was able to buy the 24-kilometer Derwent Valley industrial area at a steep discount. The factory buildings and workers' cottages remained. They only needed to be retrofitted with enchantments to be usable. Matthew and Sirius spent a short, intense period renovating several factory buildings. For now, the only occupant was the company producing the wizarding newspaper, so they didn't need much space. Huck could hardly stop marveling. If only enchanted manufacturing could be popularized, this is too convenient. Matthew's speed in dealing with pollution had impressed him too. In about 10 minutes, a black, tainted river had run clear. Matthew admitted that if other wizards had done the same task, it might have taken a day or two, but even that was astonishing. For muggles to deal with such widespread contamination might take years. The statute of secrecy won't allow too much interference, Sirius said, shaking his head. It's very difficult, Huck agreed. He knew well how dangerous breaching wizard-muggle barriers could be. I wonder if your Minister for Magic is easy to work with. If I became Prime Minister, perhaps we could start some official cooperation. Matthew raised an eyebrow. Uncle, are you aiming for a promotion? Huck smiled and pretended to be modest. It's early days, but one never knows. In truth, Huck was feeling optimistic. The coming general election looked promising for him. A few rivals were struggling, giving him an opening. Helping Matthew also helped himself. Cleaning up derelict industrial land freed funds and opportunities that could be showcased as departmental achievements. The more funding he secured, the more political successes he could claim. In the Auror interrogation room, Cornelius Fudge looked ruinous, every inch of his usual pomp and complacency gone. His confidant, Dolores Umbridge, had betrayed him. Turning with the wind, she had handed Rufus Scrimger, head of the Auror office, evidence of Fudge's contact and collusion with the 45s. Fudge protested weakly. I was not involved in the 45 rebellion. He could never admit to colluding with the 45s. The uprising had cost many members of the International Confederation of Wizards their lives, and even Dumbledore had been stripped of the title of Supreme Mugwump. If Fudge's culpability were proved, he would spend the rest of his life in Azkaban. Rufus Scrimger produced a small phial and said coldly, It doesn't matter if you deny it. Veritaserum will make you talk. Fudge no longer held office. He had stepped down as Minister for Magic and was in a transitional limbo with no official protections. Scrimger had no qualms about using Veritaserum. I am the former Minister for Magic, Fudge shouted as 2 Aurors forced the potion past his lips. I have many secrets. You can't do this. Don't worry, Scrimger said. We won't ask anything we shouldn't. No, this is against regulation, Fudge screamed as the potion took hold. Soon his eyes glazed and his resistance melted. Under a rapid series of questions, Scrimger drew the answers he wanted. Did you accept gifts from the 45S? Yes. Did you meet privately with the 18 Lanark on multiple occasions? Yes. Did the 45 Eyes ask you to submit the proposal to repeal the prohibition of wand use by goblins regulation? Yes. Fudge slumped in his chair, heart as cold as ash. The sight of the Veritaserum phial had told him everything he needed to know. It was over. Some among the 46 could resist Veritaserum. He was not one of them. Years in high office had let his magical control grow rusty. He had no means to hold his tongue now. Scrimgeour allowed himself a faint, satisfied smile. Fudge had handed him exactly the political ammunition he needed at the decisive moment of the new minister's election. Exposing a former minister's collusion with the 45 would boost Scrimgeour's reputation and remove rivals. Later that day at the Wizengamot, the court convened for Peter Pettigrew's trial. The presiding judge was the newly appointed Minister for Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour himself. He had pushed for the trial, seeing in it another chance to overturn the previous minister's decisions and burnish his own wisdom. Matthew, who had captured Pettigrew, sat in the witness box. Peter looked haggard in the dock, as if he had been thoroughly cared for. The trial produced no surprises. Peter knew his fate and confessed. Afterward, Sirius Black slumped back in his seat and gave a bitter, hollow laugh. Catching Peter could not absolve him of the guilt he carried. As the crowd dispersed, someone stopped Matthew in an aisle. "Please wait a moment." A portly man stepped forward and extended his hand with an ingratiating smile. "Marcus Crabbe." Matthew shook it. "What can I do for you?" "I'm the owner of Crabbe Paper Industry," Marcus said. "I'd like to cooperate with your Magical Age publishing house." Matthew's eyes narrowed. The Wizarding newspaper had been selling exceptionally well and had eaten into the sales of rival papers. Those papers could still collect subscription fees, but the paper manufacturers were feeling the squeeze. Matthew produced the Wizarding newspaper himself. "What kind of cooperation did you have in mind?" Marcus beamed. "I want to invest in Magical Age Publishing House. If Crabbe Paper Industry takes a stake, we can help in production. Our process for making magical paper is mature. If we produce the Wizarding newspaper, your paper costs could be cut by at least half." Matthew considered the offer and answered cautiously. "Magical Age Publishing House isn't short of funds right now. Perhaps we could cooperate another way. If your paper really is that cheap, we could simply buy it from you." The smile on Marcus's face stiffened. He forced a grin. "If Crabbe Paper Industry doesn't take a stake in Magical Age Publishing House, we can't offer such low prices. We could, at best, produce the Wizarding newspaper for you at a 10% discount." He was offering the discount only to secure shares. He had seen the Wizarding newspaper's potential and wanted in. Matthew shook his head. 10% is too little. At that price, Matthew would rather handle it himself. Once the process matured, he might even reverse into the paper business. Marcus watched him leave as his smile vanished. Back at Hogwarts, Matthew asked Geralt, who was well informed, "What does Will Crabbe's family do?" "Crabbe Paper Industry," Geralt replied promptly. "His father runs the company." Matthew stroked his chin. He hadn't forgotten the broomstick explosion during his third-year Quidditch match. He had exposed Perkin McNeil's tampering then, but Perkin had acted at Will Crabbe's instigation. Though Matthew had removed Perkin from the picture, and the McNeils had met a grim fate in a thunderstorm, Will Crabbe had seen through something and thereafter avoided Matthew. He'd never had the chance to confront Will. Now the father of the boy who tried to kill him wanted a piece of his publishing house. It was tempting. If he could take over Crabbe Paper Industry, he'd not only secure his business, but settle an old score. Christmas was coming. Will Crabbe would likely be home. Matthew made a quiet plan to pay him a visit. 2 weeks later, Sirius sent word in alarm. "What's the rush?" Matthew asked as he arrived at the Magical Age Publishing House manager's office. "The ministry just sent a letter. Our license isn't in compliance." "How can that be? We completed all the procedures. We have the news license, the publishing license, and the business license." Sirius's face darkened. "The ministry recently issued a new 8, and we haven't obtained it yet. They've ordered us to stop producing the Wizarding newspaper." "And there's more," Sirius added. "Shortly after the ministry issued the new license, Crabbe Paper Industry obtained approval. Our application has sat without word for days." Matthew raised an eyebrow. He suspected Crabbe had retaliated after being rebuffed. The Crabbe family was not one of the Sacred 28, but in the last 2 centuries they had placed many officials in the ministry. Their influence was considerable. "Is that all?" "No," Sirius said gravely. "Crabbe Paper Industry has a new product ready to go, with functionality almost identical to our Wizarding newspaper." "They probably circumnavigated our patent," Matthew said. "The product hasn't hit shelves yet," Sirius said, but I expect next week. If we can't sort the licensing quickly, they'll take our market. Matthew had expected piracy. He had priced the wizarding newspaper low to seize the market fast. He had no illusions. A knock at the office announced the chief news editor, a blonde woman Matthew remembered from Hogsmeade. She'd been the woman whose happy emotions he had accidentally fed on when he first transformed into a Dementor. She reported, "People from the ministry are here. They say they want to inspect the premises for safety hazards." Matthew and Sirius went out together to meet them. Dolores Umbridge, dainty in pink and triumphant, swiftly made herself known. As head of the Magical Markets Department, she now oversaw Diagon Alley, a reward for switching her allegiance to Rufus Scrimgeour. When she saw Matthew, her eyes brightened and she sashayed forward. "Matthew Black," she cooed, "your store renovations are not in compliance." "How are they not in compliance? We filed for the modifications," Matthew replied. "That was before," Umbridge said with a shrill primness. "I am the head of the Magical Markets Department now. I believe such renovations pose a safety hazard. Changes like these are no longer allowed in Diagon Alley." "But these used to be 5 adjacent shops, didn't they?" Matthew argued. "Change it back immediately," she snapped. Sirius intervened. "The ministry has no such regulation. You can't simply order us to change it back." "Just you wait," Umbridge said, glaring, and left with 2 subordinates in tow. Matthew frowned. "She's looking to cause trouble on purpose. She won't relent." He turned to Sirius. "Move the editorial and reporting departments to the Derwent Valley Industrial Zone. Keep only the marketing department here as our public front." He had bought the Derwent Valley site when opportunity allowed. There was enough space to relocate operations. As he expected, Umbridge moved to formalize the pressure with a set of new management methods for Diagon Alley. Under those rules, Magical Age Publishing House's business hall would have to be rebuilt. On the day the terms were announced, Umbridge visited the shop to savor her power. But Matthew and Sirius were not there. She didn't need to see them weep. She wanted to feel the satisfaction of exerting control. The accumulation of setbacks convinced Matthew that Voldemort should make a move. Since he had set his trap for Dumbledore, Lord Voldemort had been oddly quiet, and Matthew did not know his whereabouts. It did not matter. Matthew had a Horcrux of Lord Voldemort in his possession and other means at his disposal. It was Christmas Eve. Umbridge had received many gifts from Diagon Alley merchants eager to stay in her favor. The new management methods had unnerved many shopkeepers. She was knowledgeable enough to alienate them all and would reward those who showed sincere deference. She picked up a small box and, expecting nothing of note, found inside a delicate 30 set on a silver chain. The front was inset with amber glass in which green gemstones formed a sinuous, snake-like pattern. She held it to the light and murmured, almost dazed, "What a beautiful set." A mysterious influence pushed her hands to slip around her neck. She turned before a mirror, delighting in how well it matched her pink dress. Perched on a branch outside the window, a sparrow watched the scene. It was a transfiguration clone of Matthew's, placed to observe. Matthew had anonymously sent Salazar Slytherin's 37 to Umbridge and left the transfiguration clone to follow her, in case the Horcrux lost control and harmed the innocent. His 41 was not present. He had other matters to attend to. Crab paper industry was obstructing them. The new 8 had not been granted for Magical Age Publishing House, and orders were piling up without the ability to print the wizarding newspaper. Merchants and customers were canceling and turning to Crab's new 17 instead. Matthew resolved to settle both old and new scores. 238. Crab Estate Auction. The Christmas holidays were short, and many witches and wizards from pure-blood families chose not to take the Hogwarts Express home. There was a quicker way: travel to Hogsmeade and use the pub's flue fireplace. Well, Crab was one of them. He had to get home early today. The Crab family was holding a Christmas Eve ball at the manor to celebrate the successful release of Crab Paper Industries' new product, the 22. The Magical Age Publishing House wouldn't be able to obtain the necessary licenses for a long time, and the 22 had quickly encroached on the market that the wizarding newspaper had opened. The wizarding world runs on influence. The Crab family isn't like your House of Black, with only a few heirs left, Will thought, feeling a flush of satisfaction. Magical Age Publishing House was Matthew's company, so undermining it was the same as undermining Matthew. He had held a grudge against Matthew for a long time. Before, Will had been the one bullying others. Even classmates from other pure-blood families had been deferential. But Matthew had dared to beat him in front of his cronies, an affront Will had never forgotten. Will suspected Matthew of darker things, too. The deaths of the McNeil father and son still struck him as suspicious. Traveling under escort with an adult wizard, their boat and both men allegedly sunk by a thunderstorm. Will had long suspected Matthew's involvement. Ever since, he'd avoided Matthew altogether, too ashamed to draw more attention. That humiliation burned. But Will told himself revenge was coming and that he would enjoy Matthew's downfall in time. He stepped into the emerald flames and was transported to Crab Manor through the fireplaces 31. Young Master Will, the ball will begin in an hour. Please change quickly, the house elf who had been waiting by the hearth said respectfully. Will nodded and went into the changing room, letting the house elf dress him. The elf took off his wizarding robe and fitted him with an exquisite white shirt and a brown waistcoat, but Will had put on some weight in the past few months, and the buttons strained. In irritation, he lifted his foot and kicked the house elf over. "Milo, you're useless. You hurt me," he said with a look of disgust. Milo is useless. Milo hurt young Master Will. The house elf sobbed, scrambling to its feet and slapping itself repeatedly. Will watched calmly as its cheeks puffed and reddened, then kicked it down again. "The ball's about to start. How long are you going to delay? Get me something that fits," he snapped. The house elf ignored the pain and hurried to the wardrobe to fetch a proper tailcoat. In another room, two men puffed on cigars. One was the portly Marcus Crabbe, the man who had blocked Matthew in the court corridor that day. The other was his lean brother, Gregory Crabbe. Marcus blew a smoke ring and asked, "What did Malfoy say?" Gregory shook his head. "Malfoy said the Dark Lord hasn't contacted him." Gregory was on good terms with Lucius Malfoy. His son Vincent was Draco's crony. Marcus's expression softened. So that letter was a fake, or at least not from the Dark Lord. Some time ago, Marcus had received a letter that read, "Crabbe, pledge your loyalty to the Dark Lord. Bellatrix Lestrange." As a former Death Eater, Marcus knew Bellatrix as one of the Dark Lord's most fanatical followers. Since the Goblin Rebellion freed the prisoners from Azkaban, Bellatrix had not been caught by the Ministry and remained at large. After the Dark Lord's fall, many implicated pure-blood families were ruined, killed, imprisoned, or left with only a few members. The Lestrange family, Bellatrix's in-laws, had been left with no heirs. That presented an opportunity for the Crabbe family to grow. Over the past decade, the Crabbes had snapped up the assets of many extinct lines. Crabbe paper industry had acquired rival paper companies and effectively monopolized the wizarding world's paper, ink, and printing industries. Marcus did not want the Dark Lord back. A return would destabilize their gains. The 24 hasn't reacted. The Dark Lord hasn't returned, so it must be Bellatrix trying to get us to do something, Gregory said, rolling up his sleeve to reveal the 24 brand on his arm. He, too, had been a Death Eater. Marcus flicked his cigarette into the ashtray. "Times have changed. We don't need to answer her. Even if the Dark Lord did return, he would have to rely on the Crabbe family to rule the wizarding world." The House of Black put all its remaining assets into Magical Age Publishing House. Marcus curled his lip. "The 22 will soon take over the market the wizarding newspaper built. Then, the House of Black will vanish into dust." He felt a conqueror's thrill at driving ancient pure-blood lines into oblivion. Marcus stood, adjusted his collar, and said, "Let's go downstairs. Dinner's about to start." There were many guests at Crabbe Manor, and the Malfoys arrived last. For formal events like this, guests tended not to use the flue. After Draco entered, he quickly spotted Vincent Crabbe. "Father, Mother, I'm going to find Vincent," he said. Lucius nodded without comment. Narcissus smiled and warned, "Don't cause trouble, Draco." He left without argument. Watching Draco and Vincent, Lucius felt a wash of memory. Once, Vincent's father had been a comrade. Things had changed. Gregory no longer treated him with the same deference, and he was uneasy about the Crabbe family's recent boldness. The crabs are getting arrogant, he thought, but he kept his displeasure to himself. Their power was undeniable. Lucius, you finally made it. I thought you got lost. Gregory greeted him with an expansive smile. Lucius smiled back. I had to wait for Draco to come home. We haven't had a drink together in ages. Let's toast to our friendship. Gregory picked up 3 goblets and poured for the Malfoys. Lucius drained his wine and asked, Where's your brother? I haven't seen Marcus yet. He was just here. He's gone to discuss some matters with Minister Scrimger and will be back soon, Gregory said with a smile. Lucius's smile stiffened. If it were any other time, Marcus would have stayed until all guests had arrived. I need to keep closer to Minister Scrimger, Lucius thought. He'd backed the wrong people and lost influence with the new minister. Gregory's tone turned confidential. Let me tell you some good news. There will be something special at the auction later. There would be a charity auction during the dinner. Usually such events offered only middling antiques or minor alchemical curiosities. Lucius raised an eyebrow. What is it? Gregory lowered his voice. Something that belonged to Goblin Elder Lanik. They say it's related to Herpo. The changes to Lanik at Hogwarts had been witnessed by people in Matthew's and Luna's dorms and had become fodder for gossip. Lucius was surprised. He hadn't known. Minister Scrimger entrusted us with the auction, Gregory added. Lucius understood. The auction's purpose was to raise ministry funds. The items were likely confiscated from the rebellious goblins. Whether any of them truly related to Herpo was another matter, but he was unsettled that he'd been kept in the dark. Marcus returned to the stage and, with the assistance of a 49 charm, amplified his voice so it boomed through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, he called. Welcome to tonight's dinner. You should have received notice that there will be an auction at Crab Manor this evening. I will personally serve as auctioneer. He raised his glass in a toast. The items for this auction are rare. Many are things goblins keep hidden. They were confiscated by the ministry from the rebellious goblins. 2 young girls pushed out a cart, and atop it lay a gleaming, cold sword. Marcus smiled. For example, this sword. I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of the 6, yes? A murmur rippled through the room. You mean, this is the 6? Marcus waved off the suggestion. No, I didn't say that. He went on to tell the tale. Gryffindor had once commissioned Goblin King Ragnarhurst to forge a sword. Ragnar forged the finest weapon of his life, but afterward he coveted it and tried to steal it back. Gryffindor repelled the goblins and warned Ragnar that if he ever attempted the same again, he would use that sword to kill him and all his subjects. Most people knew that much, Marcus said, but few knew the sequel. Ragnar longed for Gryffindor's sword until his death. He spent the rest of his life crafting new swords, trying to recreate that peerless blade. What we are auctioning tonight is the last sword Ragnar forged before he died. Originally, it had no name. Ragnar died before he could name it. Later goblins called it the Ragnar. Whether this sword is as powerful as the 6, we cannot say. The 6S has been lost for many years. The Ragnar sword lay in the Goblin secret vault until it was seen again recently. Goblins claim Ragnar died with a smile after making it. I dare say it may even surpass the 6. It is an extraordinary collectible. I'm sure there will be much interest. Starting bid, 10,000 galleons. Marcus's performance stoked excitement. Hands shot up. 15,000, 18,000, 20, 30, 32, 35, 50,000. The bids climbed rapidly, because 50,000 galleons was a sum most common wizards would never see in a lifetime, and yet someone called it without hesitation. Lucius lifted his cup toward Minister Scrimger, who caught his eye and smiled. 50,000 was the amount Lucius himself intended to bid, a largesse, less for the sword than as a show of support for the minister. He had missed chances to help when it mattered and would not pass up any opportunity now to be seen aiding the ministry. 50,000 going once, Marcus intoned. 50,000 going twice? Any higher bids? 50,000 going 3 times. Sold, Marcus applauded. Congratulations, Mr. Malfoy, on acquiring today's first treasure. The guests applauded in turn. Marcus continued, selling dozens of goblin rarities. Minister Scrimger's smile grew broader. The auction had raised substantial funds and would give him freer hand in the future. Marcus's smile turned enigmatic as he lowered his voice. Next, we have the grand finale of this auction, he said. It is said that it is related to Herpo. 239. Breaking through and provoking, Marcus Crabbe clapped his hands, and two young girls pushed in a small cart. He stopped the suspense and whipped back the red cloth. On a silver tray sat a lump of clear, crimson crystal. Inside it floated a strange, preserved creature, a mammal-like body crowned with twisted ram's horns, and shockingly, 12 pairs of insectile legs. A hollow murmur rippled through the room. For the auction's grand finale to be a chunk of crystal was a disappointment. "It's just a piece of crystal," Lucius Malfoy said flatly. "And you claim it's connected to Herpo? If you expect us to be impressed, at least give the item a proper story." Marcus's face lit up. "Those of you who know the history will understand," he began, and then launched into his spiel. The rebel elder Lannick once broke into the Chamber of Secrets in Hogwarts and transformed into a monstrous thing. Ministry investigations show Lannick claimed he possessed artifacts left by Herpo the Foul. The wands used by those rebels were all supplied by Lannick. Anyone who studies the old texts knows Herpo pursued life and death arts to extremes. Lannick's changes are almost certainly connected to Herpo. And this, Marcus tapped the crimson crystal dramatically, is something Lannick left in the rebels' secret vault. And most importantly, he lowered his voice, it's alive. Marcus picked the crystal up and closed his eyes, pretending to listen. If you hold it close, you can hear it. Lucius frowned. Crabbe, sentient magical objects are dangerous. That's not necessarily a selling point. Marcus waved him off. Don't worry. The Ministry tested it. It shows no sign of consciousness, just a meaningless insect chirp. We think it's an extinct species. The key point is, Herpo used some unknown means to preserve it for centuries without killing it. We have tried every method and cannot open the thing. If anyone here can, perhaps you will unlock Herpo's secrets. I'm sure you're all intrigued. He tapped the gavel. Starting bid, 10,000 galleons. 50,000, Lucius called loudly. The hall fell silent. 50,000 surprised Marcus. He had expected more. Any higher bids? 60,000, someone else shouted. 80,000, 100,000, Lucius continued, his voice rising. After a pause, he stopped. 80,000 had been his limit. A new bidder had pushed it to 100,000. Marcus announced the bids then. 100,000, going once, twice, sold. He looked toward the table where the winning bid had come from. Aside from a few acquaintances he'd invited, most faces at that table were unfamiliar. He didn't think much of it. Families and guests often brought along strangers. The banquet resumed. Minister Scrimgeour thanked everyone, and the auction items were moved to a side room to be delivered after the event. Marcus went around thanking tables. When he arrived at the winning table, a well-dressed man smiled and said, "Crabbe, I'd like to see the specimen now." "Of course," Marcus replied, leading them to the storeroom. 6 Aurors stood guard inside. Marcus opened the box. "It's in here. How will you pay?" The man took the crystal and toyed with it, then leaned close and murmured in Marcus's ear, "Can Will Crabbe's life be worth 100,000 galleons?" Marcus's pupils shrank. Rage and fear lanced through him. He began to call for the Aurors, but the 6 men standing guard wore unreadable, almost mocking expressions. One of them reached into his robes, uncorked a vial, and drank. The other 5 followed. In an instant, the men changed. No polyjuice disguise now, no Aurors but notorious Death Eaters revealed. Marcus's stomach dropped. "You're together," he spluttered. He spun toward the door. It was locked. The man who had whispered stepped forward and, like the others, drank from a vial. His features warped into a familiar, cruel likeness. Bellatrix Lestrange. Marcus ground his teeth. "Bellatrix, what do you want?" he spat. "If the Dark Lord were still here, he'd never let you scum walk free." Bellatrix licked her lips and smiled. "What if I told you it was the Master who sent us?" Marcus backed away. "Impossible. He's been gone for over 10 years. The Dark Mark hasn't moved either. You don't have the right to invoke his name." A scorching pain flared in Marcus's left arm. He froze. Could it be true? He rolled up his sleeve and saw the dark mark on his skin pulsing with a dark green glow. He didn't think. He knelt, voice trembling. "Master, your servant Marcus Crabbe greets you," a raspy, ugly voice hissed from the mark. "Crabbe, can I still trust you?" Marcus didn't know how much power the Dark Lord retained after a decade, but he wasn't about to gamble. "Master, The crab family remains your loyal servant. Very well, the voice drawled. I need you. I want you to bring me Harry Potter's blood. Marcus nodded frantically. I obey, master. Once the mark's glow faded, Marcus addressed Bellatrix. Did you replace the aurors just to take these auction items? Bellatrix shook her head. Those trinkets mean nothing to the master. We're lying low for now, keeping an eye on the ministry. Hidden against the wall was a small gecko that had watched everything. That gecko was Matthew, sent to infiltrate Crab Manor. He hadn't gone there to steal trinkets. He'd come on Christmas Eve to finish off Will Crab. He hadn't expected to stumble into Death Eaters impersonating aurors. What he'd wanted was to inspect the Crimson Crystal and, if possible, disrupt whatever plot was unfolding. Matthew listened long enough to grasp the basics. Voldemort was impatient. He wanted to return quickly and had demanded Harry's blood by proxy through Marcus. From the second-floor balcony, he could sense Will's magical signature, weak, and beside him on the balcony, another wizard's aura was faint as well, likely a student. There was no further intelligence to be had, so Matthew slipped back out the window and scaled the wall to the balcony where Will was. Will was not alone. He held a woman close, her hands sliding under his robe, whispering, Master Will, not here. My husband will know. She tried to resist, but her body tangled with his. Will toyed with the woman's breasts and grinned. Wouldn't it be better if he found out? Next time, I'll let him watch. Give him a little participation. Matthew crept up and saw them, still only beginning to disrobe. He also saw Marcus had left the storeroom and returned to the hall. The Death Eaters hadn't kept him locked there long, so as not to draw attention. Matthew shifted his form. He could copy a face with transfiguration. He took on Bellatrix's features and shouted, Avada Kedavra. The green bolt struck out of the darkness. Will had a heartbeat to realize what was coming, no time to scream or dodge, and he folded like a puppet cut from its strings. The woman shrieked and scrambled back toward the house. Matthew ignored her, dropped from the balcony, returned to gecko form, and slipped back to the storeroom where the auction items had been stored. The woman's cry downstairs drew the attention of the guests. A house servant who had seen Will take a visitor upstairs hurried to investigate, panic on his face. The servant burst onto the second floor and found a disheveled maid raving, Someone attacked Master Will. I saw it. Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix's name struck terror. The servant's face went white, and he sprinted down to tell Marcus. He did not go to the scene himself. He feared running into Bellatrix. Back in the storeroom, Bellatrix had heard the commotion and told the others, Change back. Something's happened downstairs. I'll go see. She drank a vial and resumed the guise of the red-haired nobleman. The 6 Death Eaters drank their own vials and straightened as aurors again. As soon as Bellatrix went to the hall, Matthew, still in gecko form, transformed into the red-haired man and pushed the storeroom door open. The plan's changed, he hissed. Crab betrayed the master. We must leave, now. The others' eyes flicked with alarm. They hesitated to believe him. One threw a bottle toward Matthew. Drink the antidote. Matthew sniffed it, recognized it as the polyjuice antidote meant to force a reversion, and then drank the polyjuice potion the others had been using, only as a ruse. His earlier transformations were pure transfiguration. The antidote did nothing to him. He let the potion and antidote swirl over his hands and then adopted Bellatrix's face again. Convinced, the Death Eaters hurried out. Matthew waited until they left, then grabbed every item in the room. He recognized the finale piece at once. The creature in the crystal was a void creature. The aura matched that around Herpo's things. Most wizards wouldn't know what they were looking at, but Matthew, who dealt with void matters, felt the resonance deeply. There were no anti-apparition wards at Crab Manor, so he apparated away with the lot. The chaos would keep the ministry busy, and having the auction items vanish would ruin both Scrimgeour's evening and the crab name. The 6 Death Eaters, still disguised as aurors, had charged upstairs. They found Marcus hurrying toward the commotion with a few other men. Marcus Crab, how dare you betray the Dark Lord? They screamed. You deserve to die. Marcus, reeling from the mark and the summons, pleaded, Don't kill me. I didn't betray the Dark Lord. Avada Kedavra. 6 green curses fired in unison. Marcus rolled and managed to avoid 2 of them, but 4 struck true. He thumped to the floor and lay still, lifeless. A woman in the crowd fainted, stunned by the double horror of seeing both father and son struck down in one night. The Death Eaters brandished their wands. A burst of dark green light bloomed in the air, a sign of the Dark Mark. A few stunned onlookers on the second floor screamed in terror, "He's back! You know who is back!" Having done their work, the 6 Death Eaters ignored the others and apparated away from Crab Manor, leaving chaos and a hall full of witnesses behind. 240. Harvest Review. The commotion upstairs carried down to the first floor. Ministry officials, led by Minister Scrimgeour, rushed to the second floor, followed by a crowd of curious guests. "Minister Scrimgeour," several guests on the landing cried. "Marcus Crabbe and his son have both been killed by Death Eaters." Scrimgeour's face hardened. Many ministry officials were attending this banquet, and his party included numerous members of the Auror office. For Death Eaters to kill the hosts in public was a direct insult. "Marcus!" Gregory Crabbe stepped forward and checked Marcus Crabbe for breath. His face went ashen. Scrimgeour's expression turned darker still. He could already imagine the headlines. Tonight's fundraising would buy him some leeway, but he would be forced to answer for this. He asked coldly, "Which Death Eaters attacked the Crabs?" The blonde witch, still shaking, blurted it out. "The one who killed Will Crabbe was Bellatrix. Marcus was killed by the 6 Aurors you brought with you." "Aurors?" Scrimgeour's face went white. He glanced at his aide, signaling her to check on the auction items, then asked, "What else? Did they speak? Was there any exchange?" Bellatrix didn't say anything. She struck Will straight away with the killing curse. The witch swallowed. "And Marcus, before he died, he said, 'I did not betray the Dark Lord.'" Terrified, she spilled everything. At that moment, Scrimgeour's assistant came running up, panicked. "Minister Scrimgeour, the auction items, they've all been looted." Scrimgeour's expression was stone. His mood dropped from elation at the evening's donations to the chill of a cellar. If Marcus Crabbe had ties to Death Eaters, why invite the ministry to hold the auction at Crab Manor? Was it a setup to facilitate theft, or had a dispute broken out over spoils? He restrained himself and stepped aside from his aide. "Which Aurors were involved?" he demanded. Gregory Crabbe hurried to protest. "Minister, the Crabbe family has no contact with the Death Eaters. A few days ago, Marcus received a threatening letter from Bellatrix, but it did not mention the auction. The theft has nothing to do with us." Scrimgeour could not accept that at face value. This had to be investigated. He whirled and barked at the head of the Auror office standing behind him. "Robards, what fine subordinates you have." The 6 Aurors in question were young recruits who had joined in recent years. They were not known Death Eaters, so Scrimgeour concluded they must have been secretly replaced. Gideon Robards, the Auror head, could only apologize again and again. "I'm sorry. This was an oversight. I will investigate this to the very end." Scrimgeour's voice was cold. "Finding a few rats in the house suggests more are hidden. Robards, I hope this never happens again. Go and search all the guests. Make sure no more Death Eaters are hiding here." Robards' face fell. That order would offend many of the attendees. These guests were wealthy, noble, and influential. Searching them would cause a scandal. In the crowd, Bellatrix, disguised as a red-haired noble, watched with a grim expression. She backed away behind others, with several Death Eaters posing as guests. This was a serious blow. The Death Eaters would have to abandon the identities they'd assumed, and those placed within the Auror office were at risk of exposure. They had moles in other departments, so it wasn't a total loss. Not wanting to press their luck against the ministry's sudden reaction, Bellatrix and a handful of Death Eaters slipped to a corner and apparated away before the situation escalated. After leaving Crab Manor, Matthew went straight to his aunt's house for Christmas Eve. "Matthew, this potion, will it really let us conceive a child?" Aunt Diana wiped her eyes. He answered gently, "Yes, this potion can treat the after-effects of your surgery." Aunt Diana had once suffered a serious illness, and surgery had left her unable to conceive. Matthew had long known how much she wanted children. He had tried potions before without success, but the healing properties of the fairy spring were extraordinary, capable of restoring lost vitality and repairing the body. Treating the sequelae of her surgery was straightforward for such a remedy. Aunt Diana, though much younger in spirit than her husband Huck, was now 39. She would be an older mother, but with Matthew's support, the risks were manageable. She hugged him, overcome with gratitude. Being unable to have children had long been her deepest regret. The chance to change that meant everything. After a warm family dinner, Matthew returned to his room to examine what he had taken from the auction. He began with the sword of Ragnar, curious whether it truly rivaled the sword of Gryffindor. He had once borrowed Gryffindor's sword and remembered how it could slice through iron without magical aid. The sword of Ragnar's hilt was decorated in a similar style to Gryffindor's, but its gem was blue. Matthew transfigured a section of an iron cylinder to test the blade's edge. With a two-handed horizontal cut, the sword split the iron cleanly in two. The cut surface was smooth. The sword of Ragnar matched Gryffindor's sword in sharpness and toughness. But Gryffindor's sword had another trait. It could absorb substances to strengthen itself. Matthew took out a bottle of diluted basilisk venom he'd kept in reserve and dripped it onto Ragnar's blade. The venom slid to the floor and corroded the flooring into a black pit. The sword did not absorb it. Slight disappointment flickered through him. The sword of Ragnar lacked that particular magic, and thus was, in that respect, inferior. Still, something about the sword felt different. As a formally trained wizard, Matthew remembered minute differences. The style, length, and width were similar to Gryffindor's, but the weight differed. On closer inspection, he found a tiny gap where the gem was set at the pommel. It unscrewed. Inside was a hollow tube. "A hollow sword?" he murmured. The hardness and toughness of the blade were exceptional. Making a hollow sword of such quality would not be easy. The pommel's inner diameter matched his wand perfectly. On an impulse, he slid his wand into the cavity. The blue gem at the end flared, and the sword's balance changed. With the wand inserted, the sword felt as if he were holding his wand directly. He cast a simple spell through the sword. There was no loss of sensitivity. This was the secret of the Sword of Ragnar. It was designed to house a wand. For a wand-based duelist like Gryffindor, a weapon like this would be every bit as formidable as Gryffindor's sword. Matthew was not a swordsman by trade and had no intention of replacing his wand in combat, but the discovery delighted him. He continued to inspect the other auction pieces. These were all objects seized from various criminal owners, and several of the artifacts were intriguing. A deadwood cane, when stuck into the ground, would disable apparition wards within a 100-meter radius, a convenient device since setting permanent anti-apparition wards normally took time. A portable fireplace functioned like a standard hearth but could connect to the Flu network. Unfortunately, it was only human height, the maker having forgotten other races. A wind-riding whip looked ordinary but, when cracked, commanded gusts of wind that could lift the user. The wind was awkward to control and less practical than Matthew's Wings of Wind spell, but it could carry an entire group, useful for coordinated operations. He also found a lamp that could extinguish light. When its candle was lit, all light sources in a room became invisible, even the candlelight itself. He tested it and discovered the effect held only up to rooms of about 500 square meters. Once the candle burned out, the effect ended. The rest of the items had mostly collector's value. Finally, he picked up the auction's centerpiece, a crystal-clear amber vial. Inside it was sealed a strange creature with twisted ram-like horns and 12 pairs of insectile legs. He held the amber and after a moment heard faint insectile cheering. He tried to cut the amber open, but neither spells, blades, fiendfire, nor basilisk venom could damage it. I suppose the ministry tried everything and, unable to extract it, decided to auction it off, Matthew thought. The aura around the horned, many-legged creature matched the same chilling signature he'd sensed on Herpo. It was unmistakably a void creature. Matthew was familiar with void objects and sensed that this specimen had a soul, albeit a very weak one, about the strength of a mouse. Curious how it would react to void power, he decided to take the amber to the Gap world. He used his translocation charm to travel and noticed the transport consumed an unusually large amount of energy, consistent with transporting something that possessed a soul. In earlier travels, he had left Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes behind for precisely this reason. The Gap world was closely linked to the Wizarding world, and its gray mist carried a faint current of void power, making it an ideal testing ground. If anything went wrong, he could drop the amber and escape immediately, something he didn't want to risk doing inside the wizard tower. As soon as the amber touched the gray mist, the insect chirring intensified sharply. Within moments, other strange sounds began to echo through the mist.